The following program contains material of an enlightening nature. Open-mindedness is advised.
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people of the world, and especially the United States, to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, places, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form. You don't connect the dots. It's just a mass of what's all this about.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. Someone who is white is not more special than someone who is black. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
Brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people.
War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
Humans as a species are prone to amnesia. Those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it. It is thus imperative that these all-important matters be thoroughly explored and not left up to blind faith.
It's about time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
What you are now experiencing is the vibration of air particles being transformed into electrical signals by your senses and DNA, then sent to the brain where they are decoded into sounds that we associate with letters and numbers and languages, which at their core are symbols. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and you are listening to The Secret Teachings on the Dark Matter Radio Network, the LNM Radio Network, K98 Talk, Planet Paranormal, and several other internet and terrestrial radio stations, including www.thesecretteachings.info. If you log on to www.thesecretteachings.info, you'll find a show archive with all of our past episodes that you can download for free. You don't have to pay, and you don't have to sign up. Everything is absolutely free at thesecretteachings.info under the show archive. You can also find a top news tab that I try to keep updated with current events, and a way to help support The Secret Teachings by donating to us through PayPal at the very top right of thesecretteachings.info. You can also find a guest tab there with some information, a little biography on all of our past guests, at least most of the ones that I've been able to get up on the website. And today on the show, we have a new guest, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, who is the author of several books. I've read a couple of them, but he's got a whole bunch of them. The Giza Death Star, Reich of the Black Sun, the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, the Nazi International, one of the ones I've read, Babylon's Banksters, LBJ and the Conspiracy to Kill Kennedy, The Grid of the Gods, and Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops. Just a couple of the books that Dr. Farrell has written. Joseph P. Farrell has a doctorate, and he studies basically physics, alternative history, and science, and all around what he calls strange stuff. His book, The Giza Death Star, was published in the spring of 2002 and was his first venture into alternative history and science. I remember I used to go to the bookstore a lot more before I had authors start sending me books. One of the perks of being in radio, I would always see his books on the shelf, but I never really thought much of it other than that looks really, really interesting. So I'd pick it up, I'd read a couple pages, and eventually I bought one, and I read into it pretty extensively, the one about the Bell, the SS Brotherhood of the Bell. And after that, I got in contact with Joseph, and we've been in contact for, it's been 6 or 7 months now. I finally got a time to bring him on the show. So Joseph P. Farrell will be joining us here in a couple of minutes. The topics range from everything from the Giza Pyramid being a Death Star, Pyramid of Cheops, to the Bell, Die Glocke, the Wunderwaffe, the Wonder Weapon, the Philadelphia Experiment, Project Rainbow, the USS Eldridge, the Nazis' post-war plan to essentially continue their ideology and research in South America, Argentina, air fuel bombs, missing U-boats, Admiral Byrd in Antarctica, all of that and much more. Those are going to be the topics for today's episode of The Secret Teachings. In my book, The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, which you can get a copy of at thesecretteachings.info, under the tab at the very top, it'll tell you that you click on that. It'll give you a link to where you can purchase the book. We have the soft cover version as well as the PDF. And another way you can get a copy of that is by sending a donation through PayPal and then making a comment that you want the book or sending me an email, and then I'll be able to send you a PDF copy of that book. But in the book, 740 pages, and one of the things that I discussed in the book was basically about this advanced Nazi technology, first of all, and specifically I go into details about a history of World War I, a history of World War II, very extensively towards the end of the book. I think it's like chapter 8 of 13 that I go very extensively into this. And one of the things that I discovered researching was that the B-2 bomber, the flying wing that was supposedly developed at the Bohemian Grove, at least rumors are abound that that's where the wing was developed, the design. It is very, very similar to that of Nazi scientists and their flying wings. And in fact, after Project Paperclip brought many Nazi scientists and technologies back to the United States, along with Operation Seahorse, the technology, I think, spawned into an incredible array of new technologies, and a lot of this myth, ladies and gentlemen, about extraterrestrials and flying saucers and aliens has been perpetuated in order to cover up technologies such as what we might call free energy into technologies that are far more advanced than what we typically think of when we think of the military or when we think of science. Technologies that are so far advanced that if they were to be revealed or even discussed, we would think that humans don't have this capability. It must be extraterrestrial. So why not the powers that be? Why couldn't they just take that idea and promote it, therefore to distract us from the truth of the technology that we do have today? If you look at Operation Seahorse, one of the things that I learned about writing The Grand Illusion, Slaves to Perception, the aim of this project was to essentially secure as much Nazi technology as possible and to ship it back to the United States. Now, one of the most interesting, maybe even to some disturbing discoveries of the Seahorse project was the discovery of the HO-229, or the Horten 229 stealth bomber, essentially, that was found near Frankfurt, Germany. The thing supposedly has speeds up to 600 miles an hour and was designed and built in the 1930s and 40s, ladies and gentlemen, which means where we're sitting right now in 2015, let's do a little bit of math. That's over 70 years ago. And Northrop Grumman made a model of this and found that the flying wing is actually basically a stealth craft in the 1930s, ladies and gentlemen. The technology is so far advanced, and we have been so lulled to sleep and bought off by other technologies that we don't understand that just because we don't understand that it's not extraterrestrial. And I know that this gets a lot of the paranormal ufologist MUFON crowd up in arms. I just had I had a listener from a MUFON group actually email me, and they liked the show. So I'm not bashing anybody in the paranormal realm or the extraterrestrial ufology communities or MUFON. I'm on board with you. I'm just saying let's take that research, let's not become the mainstream and deny anything contrary to what we want to believe, and let's look at the facts, the history, and the truth. That's all that I'm saying. There is an official remnant of this Horten 229 that's left over. It's actually stored in a facility in Washington, D.C. So the technology exists. It's there. And we're going to talk about all of that and much, much more with Dr. Joseph P. Farrell right here on The Secret Teachings. We're going to be talking about the Giza Death Star, Die Glocke, Nazi bell, the German bell, the Wunderwaffe, the Philadelphia Experiment, and Project Rainbow, Nazi International, and the Nazis' post-war plan to essentially continue their ideology and continue their research, which they did mostly in Argentina, and through the rat lines of Project Odessa and the Vatican, they were able to, many high-level prominent Nazis were able to escape through Project Paperclip and Odessa and the Central Intelligence Agency to the United States and to South America and to continue their research. And this is where we're going to get a lot of the stories of UFOs and aliens to hide the fact that the U.S. government was in cahoots with these people to take this technology and to implement it within our own society, culture, military, and so on and so forth. Be that Die Glocke, the Nazi bell, or be that, let's see what else. I mean, the triangle, the Astro, that was the Astro T3B, flying triangle. All of this has a very earthly origin. You could make the argument that, let's say, aliens had a hand in it, that the Vril Society channeled a group of beings from the Aldebaran star system, and maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe there's some type of spiritual entity guiding our lives and allowing us to develop these incredible technologies. But we use them so improperly. We use them to destroy, divide, and cause destruction around the world. And if we could understand our history, it would be so much easier to understand the reality in which we perceive to live today. Dr. Joseph P. Farrell coming up right here on The Secret Teachings, author of The Giza Death Star. We're talking about Nazi International, air fuel bombs, missing U-boats after World War II, the Wunderwaffe, and much more right here on The Secret Teachings. Our website, www.thesecretteachings.info. My email personally is rdgable, that's rdgable@yahoo.com. Thesecretteachings.info and rdgable@yahoo.com. Please help support the show by donating whatever you can at thesecretteachings.info. $5 here, $10 here. Any donations over $10, and I will send you a copy, PDF form, of my 740-page expose into our perception and how we are slaves to that perception, called The Grand Illusion. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes with Dr. Joseph P. Farrell.
Understand is to perceive patterns. Now, of course, what this means is that true comprehension comes when the dots are revealed and you get Stephen Johnson's long view and you see the big picture. This is this idea about patterns, recurring patterns across different scales of reality. You know, Paul Stamets talks about the mycelial archetype and how the information sharing systems that comprise the internet look exactly like computer models of dark matter in the universe, look exactly like the neurons in the brain. They all share the same intertwinkle filamental structure. It's the rise of networkism as big data advocates talk about how man-made systems are looking exactly like natural systems. The more we can measure, the more we can visualize. The more we can visualize, the more it expands our consciousness by seeing these recurring patterns across scales of reality. It blows my mind. And I think that technology increasingly is becoming an expander of human consciousness. It extends our thought, reach, and vision, and revealing so much more. It's like, whereas once I was blind, now I can see. Jeffrey West from the Santa Fe Institute is telling us that cities are really like organisms. You know, alleys are like capillaries. How is it possible that a man-made artificial technological system is behaving like a natural system? The more efficient it becomes, the more it's starting to look like nature. Really interesting, weird stuff. But it makes me optimistic. It's like when Stephen Johnson says, look, if we can understand all this stuff, anything becomes possible, right? It's the adjacent possible standing as a sort of shadow future, a map of all the ways the present can reinvent itself. It's beautiful stuff.
Did you know that Hitler modeled the SS after the Knights Templar and other Crusader orders such as the Society for Jesus or the Jesuits and the Masons? Did you know that the Third Reich never officially surrendered at the end of World War II, and that through Operation Paperclip and programs such as Odessa, the Organisation der Ehemaligen SS Angehörigen, or Organization of Former SS Members, thousands of high-ranking officials of the Third Reich, including Hitler himself, escaped to South America and even parts of the United States to continue their work in everything from rocket science to pharmaceuticals to mind control. These have been Alternative Facts, brought to you by The Secret Teachings. People who question the official version of events are usually labeled with the term conspiracy theorist, since this term is associated with paranoia and insanity. The person's questions are immediately dismissed as the rantings of someone who has gone mad, and using the ad hominem argument by immediately attacking the person rather than addressing their question, no matter how seemingly insane it may at first sound, a preconceived, often repeated storyline is allowed to exist and masquerade as absolute truth. If you train the masses to laugh at what they don't understand and to dismiss it as nonsense, then you have essentially eliminated free thought and critical thinking with little to no physical force. By setting the standards for what is possible or not, by what is apparently right or wrong, you are able to engineer an entire group of people and thus influence their choices and lifestyles to fit the corporate, political, socio-economic agenda of the real men behind the curtain. This has been an Alternative Fact, brought to you by The Secret Teachings.
Are you tired of shows about bogus photographs of guinea pigs on Mars or fake photos of Bigfoot in the woods? How about fake paranormal shows that don't actually discuss the paranormal or believe that every object they see in the sky must be extraterrestrial? How about big networks that use alternative news to promote their mainstream agenda, political shows that are one-sided, or shows that claim to know exactly what is happening for ratings, even though an event just broke in the news? Me too. At The Secret Teachings, we are not like any of those other shows. We cover any topic from symbolism to ancient history and from health to the occult, including the paranormal, but we don't just jump on board with every photograph of an orb or sample of Bigfoot hair. We have no political affiliations, no religious backing, and no financial backing. We want proof, and not someone's word. If you want proof, or at least a different perspective from a host that can both accept or deny all points of view and all pieces of evidence, without holding onto a preconditioned belief or looking for evidence to support a prior conclusion, someone who can even admit when they're wrong, then check out The Secret Teachings radio show. Airtimes and free downloads are available by visiting www.thesecretteachings.info. That's thesecretteachings.info. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and I hope that you will join us. Namaste.
Welcome back to The Secret Teachings. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. The website, www.thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. On the website, you can find a full list of all of our past episodes you can download and or stream for free. There's no need to sign up. It's all available for free at thesecretteachings.info, as well as a top news tab for all current events and a link to our guest's webpage. Our guest today Joseph P. Farrell. His website, GizaDeathStar.com. That's GizaDeathStar.com. Any other websites that he has, I'll let him tell you all about that and ways that you can find his work. A lot of it, though, is linked up at thesecretteachings.info. I have a short bio about Dr. Farrell, and then we'll bring him on to the program. Joseph P. Farrell has a doctorate in paratristics from the University of Oxford and pursues research in physics, alternative history and science, and quote-unquote strange stuff. His book, The Giza Death Star, was published in the spring of 2002 and was his first venture into alternative history and science. Following a paradigm of researching the relationship between alternative history and science, Farrell has followed with a stunning series of books, each conceived to stand alone, but each also conceived in a prearranged sequence. Dr. Farrell, welcome to The Secret Teachings. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Ryan. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Your work is just fascinating to me. I've always seen your books, such as Reich of the Black Sun, the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, always seen them at Barnes & Noble. Really wanted to know who that guy was, so I got one about the bell, and I read it, and I was intrigued, so I contacted you. We've been in contact for months now. Finally got you on the show. I'm excited to have you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got started in all of this. Was this always an interest of yours, these topics?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Going back to when I was a boy, my father was an engineer, and they played cards every Friday night, alternating back and forth between our house and their house with the local television engineer of KELO in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And this man was an electronics engineer. He had worked with the British during World War II on radar and things like that. So conversation around the table was always about something about engineering and what got me started. My father and he, I remember one conversation they were having as they were playing cards, and I was sitting there watching them. They were talking about the Great Pyramid, and viewing it from the engineer's point of view, which was an interesting conversation. So I've always been kind of interested in all these topics, and I did I did a presentation actually at the behest of another professor of some of my ideas about the pyramid for a class that we were both teaching at the University of Oklahoma, and the students loved it. And then she said, "Well, they love that. You really ought to write this up in a book." So I did, and much to my surprise, the book took off, and I followed it up with a couple of other books that I had intended to write if the book did well, and I just kind of fell into this by accident, to be quite honest with you.
And that's the Giza Death Star, published in 2001?
Yep. Right, Giza Death Star, and then there was Giza Death Star Deployed, and then I followed that up with Reich of the Black Sun, about the World War II Nazi atomic bomb research, which I think was a very different story from the one that we've been told. And then from there, it just kind of took off.
Well, tell me a little bit about the Giza Death Star. People hear that, they think Star Wars, they might think ancient aliens. What is it about?
Well, you're right. The title says it all. It's basically about my hypothesis that the structure there, the Great Pyramid, taking off with the research of Chris Dunn, was some sort of machine. But I also looked at Zecharia Sitchin, his book, The Wars of Gods and Men, where he clearly implies, it's a strange thing, he clearly implies by the text that he examines in that context that it was some sort of weapon, but he never pursues that idea. And so I thought, well, let's look at these texts ourselves and look at some of the things present in the structure and see if that hypothesis makes sense. Was it a weapon? And that's essentially the hypothesis that I advanced in those 3 pyramid books.
So it was a weapon. What kind of weapon? Was it used to fight off other aliens, or was it used for some other purpose?
No, I think it was in all seriousness, although it sounds like a wild, woolly, and crazy idea, I think it was a weapon of tremendous power, possibly even something that was much more destructive in its potential than our largest hydrogen bombs. But, pardon me, it was a weapon that, pardon me, that, in my opinion, may have been based on the ability to manipulate the fabric of space-time. And anytime you say that, anytime you have this idea that you can bring that capability down to the laboratory bench, so to speak, and manipulate that capability, then the potential, if you weaponize that capability, is quite literally almost the sky's the limit. It's a capability that would make our large hydrogen bombs look like a firecracker. So it's a radical hypothesis, to be sure. And when those books came out, particularly the first two, I was overwhelmed because I had these angry emails from other people in the alternative research community, in one or two cases, some reasonably well-known names, and they were just jumping all over me. Well, how dare you upset the jonquils and daisies view of ancient Thai civilization? So that the negative press actually helped me.
Any press is good press.
Yeah, any press is good press. That's right. Oscar Wilde said that, and he was right.
So what about other pyramids, or other pyramids you think that were built, whether in Egypt or the ziggurats in Sumer or the ones in Central and South America? Are they used for the same reason, or do they have another purpose?
Well, I think at the very minimum, I actually wrote another book much later in the series called The Grid of the Gods, and the subtitle of that is something to the effect of the physics of the pyramid peoples. And while I don't necessarily think that all of those things were built as weapons, it's very clear that they are built with some machine-like properties in mind, particularly the pyramids in Mesoamerica and then northward into Mexico. I think these things are, at the very minimum, they had some sort of machine-like purpose. If you look at their structure, if you look at the implied mathematics behind them, I even hypothesized in that book that some of the temples on the tops of these things appear to me to look like some sort of radio resonant cavity. In other words, they interact with frequencies on the infrared end of the spectrum, infrared on into radio and microwave and so on. So yeah, I think there's some machine-like purpose. As to what the total picture is, what it adds up to, I don't know, other than to say beyond the statement that you're dealing with clearly a culture or civilization that knew a lot more than we think they did.
Right, maybe even more than we do now today, you think?
Well, that's the conclusion I clearly came to in the case of the Great Pyramid. I kept bumping into a very strange phenomenon. I converted some of the dimensional measures of the coefficients of constants of quantum mechanics to British imperial measure. And the reason I did that is, if you do a little research, you find that British imperial measure is actually very close to the system of measure that apparently the Great Pyramid was built on. And once you do that and then start playing around with dimensional measures in that structure, you get harmonics, in other words, multiples of those coefficients over and over again. So in other words, it's not simply, to my non-statistician's eye, you get so many of them that this doesn't appear to be entirely accidental. Now, what I've just told you, if that's true, and please underline that word if that's true, if what I found there is actually there, then that means that somebody way back when who built that thing knew all about quantum mechanics before Max Planck, before it was a smile on his face. So, the anomalies of the structure, any way one slices it, even if that isn't true, the anomalies in the structure are such that you do find dimensional analogs of the Gaussian magnetic constant. You find analogs that will give you the speed of light. You have analogs that will give you precise measures of the distance to the sun, even the neutral point of gravity between the Earth and the Moon. So you ask yourself, well, what in the name of sense are all these things doing in that structure? Why are they there? the bottom line is that means that whoever built it knew about those things and therefore had to have a fairly sophisticated science, a fairly sophisticated metrology, and they embodied all of that in the structure.
Now, do you contribute that, and there's a lot of different factors that could go into this question, but do you contribute that to the idea of ancient aliens or perhaps a golden age culture that was just very advanced?
Yeah, a golden age culture that was very advanced. I actually followed those books up later in the series. Once I got started with this, and I have to tell people that, like I say, I had originally intended, if the initial book took off, I had about 5 other books in mind that I wanted to write, kind of planned out, mapped out, if that book took off. Well, it did, so I wrote the other 5 books. One of them was a book called The Cosmic War, and the subtitle of that is Interplanetary Warfare, Modern Ancient Texts and Modern Physics, or something like that. So it kind of gives you the idea, and basically the thesis of that book is that whatever existed way back when in the mists of prehistory may have actually been some sort of interplanetary civilization right here in our own solar system. And again, that sounds like a wild, woolly, radical, bizarre hypothesis, but when you start looking at the texts and what they actually say, when you start looking at some of the various things scattered around the solar system, we see all the anomalies on Mars, we see Saturn's moon, oddly enough, Saturn's moon Iapetus, looking like it might be something artificial. That in itself is interesting, of course, because Saturn is the home within Greek mythology of the Gigantomachy, of the war with the giants. So you get all these little indicators from ancient texts and lore and tradition and so on that something tremendously catastrophic happened in the midst of prehistory, and it was the result of a war. So those books all kind of tie together.
Now, I didn't get a chance to read the Giza Death Star. I've read the SS Brotherhood of the Bell and Nazi International. In the Giza Death Star, maybe in the second book, The Giza Death Star Deployed, did you talk about the obelisk and the energetic relationship between that and perhaps a weapon that in that of the Giza pyramids?
Right. If you look, one of the things that's very interesting is if you look at these structures, particularly the Great Pyramid, but not necessarily that. You can look at certain ancient temples. I went into this aspect of the story in another book way down the line in the series called Babylon's Banksters. If you look at some ancient temples and apply just kind of basic, simple radio engineering principles, you look at these temples, and what you're looking at, if you look at them with the eyes of engineering, is you're looking at very, very simple radio resonant cavities. So again, these people had a science of some sort, and they were certainly embodying it in their structures. And obelisks, oddly enough, are some of them, because you can go to Egypt and strike these things, create a physical stress actually on the structure, and they will be resonant to particular frequencies. So again, it looks like they were doing something. We don't know why exactly they were doing it or what the basis of their science was. I kind of take the view of John Anthony West that Egypt, if you look at their own lore of how Egypt describes itself, it describes itself as a legacy of something much more sophisticated. And again, the mystery of Egypt, just as with Mesopotamia, is you have the origin of these civilizations with absolutely no precursors. They're just all of a sudden there. And they've got this tremendously advanced mathematics and so on and so forth. So where does that come from? They don't just pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. With that information, with that knowledge, and with your research, have you seen, because you mentioned when you first came out with this, you were kind of attacked. Have you seen more and more people open up to this information, be less skeptical?
Well, I won't say that. I won't say that they're more open to it, other than the attacks stopped. And the interesting thing, I don't know exactly why, but one of the interesting things was one of these people that had originally attacked me said that, well, you're describing the work of the Ukrainian physicist Volodymyr Krasnoholovets. And if you do a little research onto this guy, he was, at the time of the Soviet Union, he was involved in the Soviet Union's very secret pyramid research projects. This is now, pardon me, these projects are now known, but at the time that the Soviet Union still existed, it had very top secret research into pyramid power, quite literally. And the Soviets built these big pyramids all over Russia, some of the biggest ones just outside of Moscow. You can go online and see pictures of these things now, but at the time that they were built, this was all a highly classified project. So anyway, this fellow who was angry, he had contacted me and basically given me these long emails denouncing my theory and basically, how dare you upset the jonquils and daisies apple cart, and I'm going to send your copies of your books to Dr. Krasnoholovets. And I said, well, fine, And so I wait several months, and not a word comes back from this guy. But interestingly enough, after he did this, and these copies were known, the biophysicist in this country, Dr. John DeSalvo, who runs a website called the Great Pyramid of Giza Research Association, invited me to be a member of it. And I thought, well, sure, fine, so I accepted his membership. And then the next thing I knew, my publisher contacted me and says, well, the Russians want to buy rights to the Giza Death Star. So the Giza Death Star actually exists in a Russian language edition.
I didn't know that.
I don't know what that means, but, but apparently I've always in my mind connected it to the fact that those pyramid books were sent to Krasnoholovets, and then the next thing I know, the Russians are buying rights to the book and publishing the book. So
well, it has to make you feel good in some way that it's getting international attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
exactly.
Now, what about some of your other works here? The ones that obviously that I've read, Reich of the Black Sun and the Esed Brotherhood of the Bell. I've always had a fascination with history of Europe, World War I, World War II, and the rise of the Nazis in Europe. But specifically, Joseph, the alternative history, if you will, the one that we're not really told about. Let's get into a little bit of details about that. Maybe we can describe Reich of the Black Sun and then talk a little bit about the Bell Project.
Okay. Well, the Nazi series of books are a major component of all of my books. I have 22 books out, and I kind of alternate back and forth between ancient topics like pyramids and ancient civilizations and the Nazis, and there is a reason for that. Part of the reason is that the Nazi Party was midwifed into existence in the interwar period by its connections to a number of German secret societies. The most familiar to people would be a society that was known as the Thule Gesellschaft. It's usually mispronounced
Thule Society, right?
Thule. It's not Thule. In German, it's Thule. But the Thule Gesellschaft, or the Thule Society, was basically one of these interwar occult-based secret societies. Their logo was even the swastika. So you have this connection, and part of the teaching of that particular society was that the Aryan race, that mythology, the Aryan race was a legacy race of a very ancient, very high civilization. So, in other words, you have that meme in the background working within the Nazi Party, and more particularly within the SS, particularly Himmler. The Reichsfuhrer SS was tremendously obsessed with the occult. And
he even used the Zeigel, the rune, as part of their logo, correct?
Yes, he used the runes and everything else. That had its own occult basis because there were people connected to the peripheries of the Thule Gesellschaft, like Lanz von Liebenfels and Guido von List and people like that did studies of runes and so on and so forth. So all of these things had definite occult esoteric background in the symbolism that the Nazis ultimately adopted. But the other thing that got me interested in that whole Nazi angle is ever since I was a boy, I've just been profoundly mystified by how they could suffer from such a mathematical and scientific dyslexia during the entire period of the war as not to be able to come up with an atomic bomb. This is one of the great mysteries, and the usual explanation of what I call the post-war Allied legend is that, well, the Nazis, they persecuted Jewish physics and Einstein left and so on and so forth. But what most people don't realize is that nuclear physics has very, very little to do with relativity, number one. And number two, even if they did lose a great number of scientists that fled Europe because of the Nazi regime, they still retained a number of very first-class top-drawer scientists. And, Heisenberg, Paul Hartek, Otto Hahn, Walter Gerlach, these were big names in international physics circles prior to the war, and they remained in Nazi Germany during the war. So to me, there's a mystery here, and I just wasn't satisfied with explanations. And the real key for me with this, Ryan, was the fact that after German reunification, circa 1992-93, the tail end of the Bush administration, the early years of Clinton, after German reunification, a funny thing happened. that was the United States began to declassify a lot of stuff that had existed in the archives about Nazi wartime secret research, and a lot of it had to do with their atomic bomb program. And I started running into these documents. I reproduced a couple of them in Reich of the Black Sun that indicate very definitely that the German atomic bomb program was not the colossal failure that we were taught. If anything, it may have been actually successful prior to the war's end. And so that set me off. Well, if that's the case, what else? What else were the Nazis up to?
Right.
We know about the V2s. We know about the V1s. Most people don't know about the television-guided missiles. Early forms of smart bombs, if you will. Most people don't know about their surface-to-air missiles, their acoustic homing torpedoes, and all of this
very, very
stuff.
Sophisticated stuff.
Well, essentially what you're looking at Mark I versions of the types of weaponry that we now take for granted.
Yep.
All of this was being developed in the Third Reich, and some of it had been developed to the point that they had either been tested or even deployed. The first operational jet fighter was German, even though the British had, Whipple playing around with jets. The Royal Air Force wasn't really interested until the Germans showed up in the skies with jet fighters. So, that kind of spurred the interest there. But
wow.
So you have all those things that were known, and so you start digging around and in the really exotic stuff. And the reason I put Reich of the Black Sun dealing with the atom bomb at the head of the Nazi series is that the real story for me was this story about the Bell. And in fact, that story has it's such a big story, in my opinion, that I've taken several books to describe the story and the implications of the story if it's true. I do think it is true, but the implications of it are what really, really intrigue me. So that followed SS Brotherhood of the Bell, kind of started that off. And the reason I headed it up, this whole Nazi series with the atom bomb project, is that if you look at the context, the Bell story, the Germans actually classified this device in one of their documents. They referred to this device with the classification of Kriegsentscheidend, which in German means war decisive. And so I got to thinking, well, if their atom bomb project isn't Kriegsentscheidend, if that's not war decisive, then exactly what is this thing?
So they put Die Glocke over top of the atomic bomb in terms of importance.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at this device, let me describe it for people and what the allegations of the story are, because this is very important for people to understand how I research. I footnote my books extensively, and I do try to let people know that when I'm constructing an argument, I'm speculating. Because there's a body of people out there, and to a certain extent their research is good, it's solid, that think the bell was nothing more than an isotope enrichment centrifuge. I think they're mistaken for reasons that we're going to get into. The bell is a device about 12 feet wide, 15 feet tall. It's obviously bell-shaped. That's why the Germans called it Die Glocke, the bell. And on the inside of this device, they had two counter-rotating metal cylinders. It was an electrically polarized device. Those cylinders rotated around a central core that I think was the cathode to the cylinder's anode. They would counter-rotate these cylinders to tremendous speed. They would inject into them a substance known as serum 525. This is all part of the Bell story. Serum 525, in its turn, was supposedly a very gooey type of heavy liquid maroon-colored metal, which, if you look at it, the descriptions of it, this substance looks to be some compound of mercury and something else. I argue the case in another book, The Philosopher's Stone, that yet another ingredient in this substance may have been thorium-229 isomer. I lay out the case for that in a book called The Philosopher's Stone. And they would rotate this substance up. Now let's look at what they're doing. First of all, when you rotate it, it's going to cohere the plane of rotation of the substance. And then what they did is they zapped this substance while it was in a state of rotation with gobs, and I do mean gobs, of high voltage direct current electricity. Now what would that do? Well, if mercury is involved, it's going to create a plasma. That plasma is going to be in a state of differential rotation because you've got the cylinders in counter rotation with each other. So you're going to have plasma in a state of rotation under electromagnetic stress, okay? So what does that sound like? Well, it sounds like the sun, okay? So I think what they were trying to do is, number one, they were trying to reduplicate the effects of the sun. Well, for what purpose? And I think once you look at kind of the argument that I present in SS Brotherhood of the Bell and then the following books, was they were attempting, first of all, to create or engineer a device on the basis of some of the interwar unified field theories that predicted a coupling effect between electromagnetism and gravity. The most famous interwar theory being, again, a German mathematician by the name of Kaluza. If you look at unified field theories from that time, you're going to find his name mentioned quite a lot. You have another influence on all of this being an electrical engineer by the name of Gabriel Krohn, who came to this country. He was a Jewish man, but a brilliant man. But he published a paper in Europe in the interwar period that he won a prize for at the University of Liège in Belgium in 1935. And it was all about how electrical engineers were noticing these anomalies, and they could take the unified field theories that had been published in the interwar period, particularly in Germany, and use those unified field theories to explain what was going on in the anomalies that engineers were noticing in large networked rotating electrical systems. Now, that's a mouthful, but what he's really told you is that you can take all these theories and bring them down right to the laboratory bench, and with mid-1930s electrical technology, engineer the fabric of space-time. That's exactly what the implications were that he's told you. So the Germans, I think, were basically attempting to construct a kind of a gateway technology based on some of these ideas to see if they could affect an electromagnetic gravity coupling. And the interesting thing is that the bell, if you do the research and dig into the story, you'll discover that the people that were working on the bell reported that it levitated. all right,
Right.
as it was turned on. Now, this is huge, because what this means, if that's true, then this means that the Bell story is the story that's at the heart of the Nazi UFO legend. Now, please note, all the device did was it levitated. It didn't zip around the sky performing right-angle turns at several thousands of miles an hour or things like this. In other words, it did not perform as a UFO did. So that's I think, a huge clue as to what the Nazis were up to. They had a gateway technology that gave them some sort of rudimentary field propulsion capability. It gave them, therefore, an ability to tinker with the fabric of space-time at a very rudimentary level. But again, once you say that, the door is open, because if you have that capability, number one, you have the possibility for a totally different type of energy supply, which certainly the Nazi SS was looking at. You have the ability for field propulsion, a totally different way of propulsion, of transport. And then finally, of course, as I've indicated, if you have that capability, then if you weaponize it, then potentially you can make a hydrogen bomb look like a firecracker. So would the Nazis classify that higher than the atom bomb? Yeah, you betcha.
Definitely. Well, all very, very fascinating, Joseph. We're going to take a quick break here on the Secret Teachings, and we'll come right back with more about the Nazi Wunderwaffe, talking with Joseph P. Farrell, author of the Giza Death Star, Reich of the Black Sun, the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, Nazi International, Babylonian Banksters, or Babylon's Banksters, rather, and much, much more. All his information linked up at thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. His website, GizaDeathStar.com. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Did you know that the Nazis experimented with a hyperdimensional torsion-based technology called Die Glocke, or the Bell? The Bell was developed at a secret base in the Czech Republic and was more classified than even the Nazis' A-bomb project. Nazi scientists experimented with the torsion-based technology as a way to tap into zero-point energy, which is believed to be the energy of the physical medium of space-time itself. The Bell was also studied as a way to manipulate gravity to be used as an advanced prototypical field propulsion technology. It used the concept of rotating magnetic fields by means of the counter-rotation of plasma within the device itself. It is interesting to note that the Nazis, even officially, worked to understand free energy, field propulsion, and the ultimate doomsday weapon over 80 years ago. The Dr. Hermann Oberth, who pioneered rocket design for the Third Reich, stated that, quote, "We cannot take credit for our record achievement in certain scientific fields alone. We've been helped," end quote. When asked by whom, he replied, quote, "The people from other worlds," end quote. Many Nazis did claim to get their technology from the Vril Society, who channeled a race of beings from the Aldebaran star system. These have been Alternative Facts, brought to you by The Secret Teachings. Did you know that Werner von Braun, the Nazi father of the U.S. space program, told his confidant Dr. Carol Rosen that when the U.S. starts putting weapons in space, it will be based on a lie? He told her the first reason would be to defend against the Russians. The second would be the threat of terrorists. The third would be the threat of asteroids. And the fourth, Werner apparently emphasized many times, was that the U.S. military was planning to use invading extraterrestrial aliens as a threat. He said, quote, "There is going to be a spin to find some enemy against whom we have to build space weapons, except it's all a lie," end quote. This has been an Alternative Fact, brought to you by The Secret Teachings.
At The Secret Teachings, we are not a part of any group, label, and we do not attempt to fearmonger, as some of the topics we discuss may seem scary. I advise you not to be afraid, but to be informed as we discuss current events and ancient history, astrotheology and symbolism, the paranormal and the occult, the esoteric, health, and much more. I am not here to tell you that what I say is truth, but to allow you to decide for yourself based on the evidence presented and the dots connected. Information is not negative. It is how you view it that determines the dimensional characteristics of either dual aspect of negativity or positivity. To catch the show, we air every Saturday on the Dark Matter Radio Network at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and every Sunday on the L&M Radio Network at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can also listen and download past episodes for free at thesecretteachings.info. Try as you might, but no amount of disinformation, propaganda, rhetoric, or trolling will change the truth. The truth is the truth, regardless if the masses accept it as is, or if it is accepted by only one out of billions. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. For more information, you can visit thesecretteachings.info. Namaste.
Welcome back to The Secret Teachings. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. Our website, www.thesecretteachings.info. We've been speaking with Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, author of several books, including Reich of the Black Sun, The Nazi International, Babylon's Banksters, Roswell and the Reich. His website, GizaDeathStar.com. That's GizaDeathStar.com. His website's also linked up at thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. If you'd like to get in contact with us, email is rdgable, that's rdgable@yahoo.com. Dr. Farrell, before the break, we were talking about the Nazi Wunderwaffe, the Nazi wonder weapon, the super weapon, the Uberwaffe. Tell me a little bit more about the bell and its significance and role that could perhaps be, I think, attributed to maybe the Philadelphia experiment.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the term Wunderwaffe because I rely on the Bell research of a Polish researcher by the name of Igor Witkowski, wrote a wonderful book called The Truth About the Wunderwaffe. It's really an extraordinary book. I highly recommend it to your readers. Even it is very expensive, but it's just an extraordinary book. In the book, he notices that the term Wunderwaffe was used at the time that the V2s and V1s were already raining down on London. And he points out the fact that in the context in which the Nazis at the time are speaking of the Wunderwaffe, that these weapons, which are usually misidentified by historians as being the wonder weapons, could not have been the wonder weapon. Militarily, they produced really no significant result other than being a major nuisance to Churchill's government and so on. So, and he also cites people like Magda Goebbels, Dr. Goebbels' wife, talking about the Wunderwaffe and clearly indicating that in the context that this term is referring to something else. And in his opinion, and I think he's absolutely correct, that the term is actually being applied to the bell. And if you look at the physics, if you go back and look at what they're doing with the bell, as I laid it out, it's dealing with physics of interfering several electromagnetic rotating fields on a plasma. They're creating basically a kind of technological version, miniature version of the sun, for all intents and purposes. Well, this is very similar to the types of concepts that you see often alleged for the Philadelphia experiment in this country, taking large degaussing electromagnetic coils on the three axes of a ship and creating an interference pattern which they hoped would lead to some sort of radar stealth, radar invisibility. And according to the lore, of course, it produced optical invisibility. But the basic concepts are the same. So in other words, we're dealing with physics and a technology that, if true, and I think definitely you can look at the literature of the period. I wrote another book in this Nazi series called Secrets of the Unified Field, the Philadelphia Experiment, the Nazi Bell, and the Discarded Theory. The discarded theory being, of course, all of these interwar unified field theories from Kaluza down to Levati and so on and so forth. Now, the interesting thing is if you look in modern physics literature, Michio Kaku and some other people that popularize the history of physics, they'll tell you that these unified field theories from the interwar period were incomplete theories and that they did not take into account the strong and weak nuclear forces of quantum mechanics. Well, that's all true, but the problem is an incomplete theory doesn't necessarily mean a non-engineerable one. That's pretty much what Gabriel Krohn in his paper that I talked about in the first part of the show was saying. He was saying that, these theories are engineerable theories, and if they're engineerable, what he's telling you is, you can play around with 1930s technology with the fabric of space-time. And this is precisely what I think the Nazis did. Now, you've mentioned in your introductions a book of mine called The Nazi International. That's an important part of this story because what happened at the end of the war with Nazi technology is really rather interesting if you look at it carefully and take the blinkers that they've taught us to read the end of the war in textbooks and college history courses. Take those blinkers off and look at what's really going on. If you look at it carefully, the Nazis themselves are the ones driving the technological division of the spoils at the end of the war. So, for example, you have the creme de la creme of their rocket and jet scientists and ramjet scientists and so on going to the United States. The Soviets, on the other hand, are getting the middle echelon project managers and technicians in the hundreds that are able to reconstruct the documents trail for the Soviets and kind of jumpstart their own post-war rocket program under Sergei Korolev and people like that. So you get basically the Nazis driving the division of the spoils very carefully, so that at the end of the war, a technological stalemate, an arms race, is going to be induced by this technology transfer to the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, interestingly enough, the Bell itself, the SS, under orders, I think probably from Martin Bormann, murdered some 60 scientists that were working on the Bell project. The project itself goes completely missing, and there's an arguable case that the device itself may have either been deliberately disassembled and flown in a gigantic Junkers 390 aircraft. This aircraft was a 6-engine aircraft that was capable of mid-air refueling. It's one of the earliest aircraft that had that capability. And it was capable, even without that, of flying nonstop from Germany to Argentina, for example, which is where I think the Bell project and documentation actually ended up, because in that book, Nazi International, I talk about a post-war project that was being conducted under the auspices of Juan Perón's government in Argentina and being run by some Nazi scientists that had fled to Argentina after the war. And if you look at what they're doing, they're talking about plasmas in rotation under high electromagnetic stress. Okay, so there's the Bell. It goes to Argentina, or at least some aspects of it do. And they continue to research it themselves under the auspices of Perón's government. And that's hugely significant, because what this means is that they kept all the real goodies to themselves, essentially. The project was inadvertently exposed by Perón in a 1951 press conference in Buenos Aires, and it created a firestorm, something of a firestorm in the world press at the time. The German scientist that was heading this thing up was denounced as a fraud and a mountebank and so on and so forth. But after the project was shut down by Perón, we don't know exactly where it goes, but it's interesting, and I talk about this in that book, that after 1954, after our first hydrogen bomb tests, the Mike test and the Castle Bravo test in particular, these two hydrogen bombs were predicted to have a certain yield, and they actually ran away, particularly Castle Bravo, with a much bigger yield. So what did the U.S. Air Force do? Well, while it's publicly denouncing this German scientist as a fraud and mountebank, it's secretly sending people down to Buenos Aires to interview this German scientist and find out just what the heck he was up to. And it's interesting when you read his own statements about what he was up to. He was telling them, I'm putting plasma into rotation and subjecting it to enormous amounts of electromagnetic stress, and what this does, he says, is it produces a cellular structure in the plasma that interacts with what he calls a kind of cellular structure in space-time, and here comes the whopper, and he actually says this, and it's one of the first cases, I think, that you can find where the phrase zero-point energy is used openly and directly in any literature, and he's using that very phrase to describe what he thinks is an interaction between rotating plasmas under electromagnetic stress and the zero-point energy, and is transducing that energy into the plasma reaction. So, there's your explanation, guys, for why your hydrogen bombs have a lot more bang than you've calculated. So, in other words, the Bell Project has huge, extraordinary implications in my reconstruction of events. And again, I want to stress for people the reason why I've written so many books pursuing different details of the project is it would be just impossible to summarize the project and its implications in just one book. So it has implications that literally spill out everywhere you turn.
Now,
the interesting thing about this guy's project, his name was Dr. Ronald Richter. His project in Argentina is in that book, The Nazi International. I point out that he's getting his equipment to conduct this project in Argentina from the Allgemeine Elektrizitätsgesellschaft, the German electrical company, that was the very company that was involved in the Bell Project back in Nazi Germany. So in other words, there's little details like that connect his project to the wartime research of the Bell. So it's a huge story, because what it's also telling us is that this post-war group of Nazis, we've got to get it out of our head that these are just a bunch of guys hiding in the jungles of Brazil and the Amazon basin in fear of their life. What it's really telling you is you're dealing with a post-war Nazi extraterritorial state, if you will, that is tremendously well financed. It has its own production and scientific infrastructure that it's able to conduct and carry on some of this wartime research. So that's quite a different story. And again, it sounds radical and just harebrained to say something like that, but I urge people to look at the actual evidence for that rather than leap to any conclusions.
Right. Well, I think that's the problem, is that people leap to those conclusions without really thinking about it, because we've been predisposed, preconditioned, and brainwashed to believe that this is how history is, when in fact it's not. It is the proverbial history is written by the victor kind of a case.
Right.
Now, one of your other books is Roswell and the Reich. I'm guessing that Roswell has a little bit to do with the Bell, too, maybe?
Oh, yes. I call Roswell and the Reich the book that ufology loves to ignore, because the silence about that book from the ufology community has been almost deafening. The book essentially explores the whole Roswell mythology, as I like to call it, and I point out in that book that you're really dealing in that story with two very, very different data sets. On the one hand, you have the data set of the technology, the memory metal, the strange lightweight foil that you could crumple up and it would unfold back into a non-creased state, and so on and so forth. And then you have the story about the bodies. And I dissect the Roswell mythology very, very carefully. But basically my hypothesis, to boil it down to a nutshell, is what if it was not something extraterrestrial that crashed in the New Mexico desert in July of 1947? What if it was, in fact, something that looked like it may have been based on Nazi technology? Now, it's interesting when you phrase it that way, because if you look at the documents and stories associated with the Roswell story, particularly the Shulgin Air Force Intelligence Collection Memorandum that a bunch of Roswell researchers always refer to, if you look at that memorandum carefully and read the whole thing, it's a genuine document. It is a genuine U.S. Air Force Intelligence Collection Memorandum that was drawn up by Brigadier General Shulgin. And if you look at it, it's clearly a document, and I think the Roswell researchers are correct. It's clearly a document drawn up in the wake of Roswell to go out and find out just what the heck are we dealing with here. But the interesting thing that the ufologists don't like to talk about is when you read that memorandum, it's not talking about extraterrestrials, and it's not talking about a field propulsion flying saucer. It's talking about vapor trails, the roar of jet engines. If you read it carefully, it's talking about vectored exhausts. And most significantly, in that memo, it points a finger very clearly and very explicitly. It's not something that's implied, but it's very explicit that this looks like it's based on some sort of technology that we saw the Germans playing around with during World War II. And so we'd better find out where the Horton brothers are. Okay. So, and they've been, this memo mentions these characters by name. Well, who are the Horton brothers? Well, the Hortons are the two German aerodynamic engineers that were coming up with those flying wings, prior to the war and flying these things around. And it's interesting, when you look at their flying wing designs, Northrop Grumman actually built a full-scale mock-up of the Horton 229 Gotha flying wing.
Yeah.
At a cost of $250,000 using, original paints, original materials and everything. And why'd they do this? Why did Northrop Grumman go to all of that expense?
I've seen those pictures before. It's crazy. It's
crazy. Well, what's really crazy is, you're looking at this thing that these German engineers came up with, this flying wing, in the late 1930s.
I know, decades ago.
Yeah, decades ago. And this thing looks very modern.
It's like the B-2 bomber.
It looks like the B-2 bomber, a smaller version of it. Well, Northrop Grumman did this because they wanted to test the radar cross-section of this thing. And they found out that it had about a 25% reduction of an ordinary airplane radar signature. In other words, it was partially stealthy. So, anyway, the Shulgin Memorandum, in the wake of Roswell, is asking, well, where are the Horton brothers? We need to find out where the Horton brothers are. Well, I can tell you where they were. And I tell you, in the Nazi International. They were down in Argentina building triangular-shaped jet aircraft for Juan Perón. So again, we have another little indicator that there's some real sophisticated post-war Nazi research going on in the world, and we're not in charge of it. So let's assume if something Nazi, just play speculation here. If something Nazi crashes in the New Mexico desert in July of 1947, fully 2 years after World War II has supposedly ended, then is this going to send the U.S. military into a tailspin of panic? Yeah, probably would.
Well, I'm guessing they're going to use the image of aliens in order to promote that, to distract away from what really happened.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly what I think happened. I call it the Roswell dialectic because if you look at the story, it is true that within hours, the U.S. Air Force is sending out stories. Oh, we recovered a flying saucer, and then hours later, oh, it's just a weather balloon, and our intelligence agents at the only functioning atomic bomb wing in the entire United States Air Force misidentified a weather balloon with a flying saucer. So my question is, well, why would you have an intelligence officer like that in charge of your base intelligence? This is doing Major Marcel a tremendous disservice, and the answer is, of course, you wouldn't have someone that stupid in charge of your base intelligence. So there's another story altogether going on. I think if you look at the technology the stories about the technology surrounding Roswell, and then the Air Force memoranda that begin to be circulated after the event. I think it's a very, very different story than standard ufology likes to put out there, and like I say, that's the reason I call Roswell and the Reich the book that ufology loves to ignore. It's actually my longest book. It's about 500 pages long because I go through the whole story with a fine-toothed comb.
Well, that's what you have to do to get to the truth. That you get these people who believe the mainstream narrative without a question of a doubt, and they ridicule anybody who tries to dig a little bit deeper. And then you get the people on the other side of the spectrum, Joseph, what you call ufologists per se, and they so badly want to believe UFOs, aliens, and the connection between them that they will look for any evidence to back up what they believe. So when you come at it from this point of view, and this is actually what got me, I think, really into your work and your research, because I've always believed the same thing, that Roswell was a type of distraction, and all of those, the crazy things like say they misidentified it, and it was a weather balloon, then it's a flying saucer, and going back and forth. It just causes confusion, and eventually people give up and they stop asking questions.
Right, exactly.
One of the big things for me, I think, and probably a lot of the listeners, and people have even asked me a similar question like this before, if the Nazis were so far advanced, looking at technology far beyond the atom bomb, if they didn't even classify that as super uber top secret, then why did they not win the war?
Well, that's I get asked that question all the time. First of all, the Bell story, let's go back to that. I discount all those stories. I wrote a book called Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops. And in that book, I take the whole Nazi UFO field propulsion flying saucer myth and legend and expose it for what I think it really is. Number one, I think it's a cover story put out after the war by certain circles within the CIA and within this post-war Nazi group. Number one, to deflect attention from the Bell. And let me again emphasize what I said about the Bell previously. This thing levitated, but that's all it did. It didn't dart around the sky like a UFO, all right? So in other words, it wasn't a Nazi UFO. It was a gateway technology. It had tremendous potential, tremendous promise, but let's not overemphasize what it was. It was not a UFO in the traditional sense. So I discount all those stories that we hear about Haunebu and Vril and their trips to the moon and Mars and all that nonsense, because there's no a shred of good provenance. There's no way that you can reverse engineer the physics, which you can do in the Bell story. And for me, that's essential, because it's not necessarily the case that the evidence for the Bell story is any different than your typical UFO, crash and recovery story. But there are enough details in the Bell story that allow you to reconstruct a kind of putative or speculative physics trail based on the physics literature of the period and what some of those scientists were actually thinking. So in other words, it's the ability to reverse engineer the physics of this device that to me is essential to evaluating its evidentiary value or possibility as a true story or not. You do not have that in the case of the Haunebu or Vril. You have no indication of what the possible physics thinking might have been behind these devices, and therefore I tend to totally dismiss that whole story. The interesting thing that we have to bear in mind here again is those memoranda that began to be circulated in the U.S. Air Force after the Roswell crash are consistent in pointing the finger of suspicion at these Nazi projects. So why didn't they win the war if they had all this stuff? Well, for one thing, you're dealing with prototype technology. In other words, this is not operationally deployable technology. But in the cases of things like the Horten Flying Wing and some of the other stories that we have coming out of Nazi Germany of experimental saucer-shaped jet-powered aircraft, that's a very different matter, and they might have perhaps been able to get some of those projects to some sort of testing stage where they were usable as deployable aerodynes with human pilots. And the other thing I get all the time is, well, you know, if the Nazis had the atom bomb, why didn't they use it? And I actually tend to think that there's two answers to this that I talk about in Reich of the Black Sun. And that is, number one, they didn't have the strategic delivery capability. An atom bomb at the time is an extraordinarily heavy device. They didn't have the ability, with the exception of a very few airplanes, to deliver these things to any strategically valuable targets in the West. And number two, the Nazi ideology was such that their most genocidal and brutal military fighting and campaigning wasn't with the Western Allies, it was with the Soviet Russians. And there we're confronted with a real problem, because if you look at the total number of casualties during World War II, and I'm going to get into some gruesome statistics here, and I beg everybody's indulgence because it's an essential part of the argument. If you look at the total casualties of World War II, fully 1/2 or more than 1/2 of the casualties of the entire war on all fronts are suffered by the Russians. And if you look at the military casualties that are inflicted on the Russians, this is somewhere around 9 to 10 million men. Total German military casualties for the entire war on all fronts is something like 2 to 3 million. I forget the exact figure. So this means if you look at military historians and the way that they have looked at the tactical and operational proficiency of the German Wehrmacht during World War II, this means that right up to the end of the war, against all combatants, the German army had a kill ratio of about 1 to 1.5. In other words, one German soldier is worth about 1.5 Allied or Russian soldiers. This is a tactical and operational competence that, particularly when you figure in what's going on the Eastern Front, the scale of slaughter that's being inflicted on the Russians there, is just totally beyond any normal operational tactical capability. This means that there may have been other types of weaponry that we've never heard about in use on the Eastern Front. And when you turn to those possibilities, you do find some very interesting things. There are persistent rumors. I cite a case of a Japanese cable from the military attaché in Stockholm to Tokyo that talks about the Germans using the Gensei Bakudan on the Eastern Front. And this is a cable that was sent in 1943. Well, what's the Gensei Bakudan? Well, it's Japanese for atomic bomb. Okay? So in other words, the Japanese military in attaché in Stockholm is telling Tokyo that, yeah, the Germans are using some sort of atomic bomb on the Eastern Front. So why haven't we heard about this? Well, for one thing, for Stalin's government to admit that it was facing, publicly, to admit that it was facing an enemy with that kind of technological edge to the Red Army, that could conceivably have collapsed their morale. We need to remember that the Red Army, the scale of slaughter being inflicted on it, even when it was winning, was such that they had to have commissars in almost every unit there to enforce the death penalty on deserters. The other thing that we're told about the Eastern Front comes from Colonel Otto Skorzeny, who was part of the German offensive on Moscow in the late autumn and early winter of 1941. Skorzeny noted in his memoirs that the Germans were using what he called liquid air bombs. Okay, so in other words, they were using some sort of primitive equivalent of a fuel air bomb. And if you don't know what a fuel air bomb is, it's a conventional explosive weapon that has the punch of a tactical nuke. In other words, if you see one of these things going off, it would appear to an amateur, to an average person, to be a small nuclear weapon, because you get mushroom cloud and an enormous area of destruction. Well, Skorzeny, in his memoirs, points out that the Germans were using these liquid air bombs in their 11-inch Nebelwerfer, their rocket artillery batteries, against the Russians. So in other words, think fuel air bombs and carpet bombing here.
Did it pretty much light the air on fire?
Well, a fuel air bomb uses the actual atmospheric oxygen as one of the initiators of the explosion. There are different types of these explosives, but essentially what you do is you set up a molecular chain, and then you detonate it through electrical means. So in other words, you can get an enormous conventional explosion out of these things. So in other words, the Germans are bombarding Russian lines with rocket artillery, and the German 6-barrel rocket launchers. You can just imagine what a battery of those things firing fuel air bombs on the poor Russians would be. Well, it was so bad, in fact, that the Russians, Stalin's government, contacted the Germans via Sweden and said, if you keep this up, we're going to go to poison gas. So in other words, the Russians were saying, let's fight fair here. If you're going to use this stuff on us, then we're going to use our chemical gas on you guys. So there's something. In other words, the bottom line here is that the Germans were willing to use some of their technologies on the supposedly backward and subhuman Slavs that they were fighting in the East, that they would never have considered against the Western Allies until the very, very end of the war, when there are indications that they wanted to use some of these extraordinarily large. I mean, I have a picture. I've seen pictures of these things, of extraordinarily large air deliverable fuel air bombs against the Western Allies, and at that point they were desperate and willing to consider anything like that. And what actually prevented them, I forget the guy's name, but there was a Luftwaffe general that in 1945 just absolutely refused to use these things against the Western Allies on moral grounds. The war was lost, and there was no point in just creating that kind of carnage. But in other words, the bottom line here is that we're dealing with something extraordinary was going on the Eastern Front. To this day, we don't know exactly what it was. The Russians still aren't talking, perhaps because there are still technological secrets to be gleaned. We simply don't know.
Now, what about rockets that had the capability of striking, let's say, New York City? Was that something that had been developed and talked about, just maybe wasn't implemented?
Yeah, that's another interesting question. There are indicators that the so-called America rocket was at least in, if not close to, testing stage by the end of the war. There are indicators that the Germans may have launched a couple of these very, very large rockets at the Peenemünde facility right toward the end of the war. There is a story that I talk about of Russian ammunition dump in the Ural Mountains that spontaneously blew up. And Soviet propaganda at the time in 1945, in an unusual admission, said, well, this was the work of fascist perfidy. Now, that may mean that, okay, they're blaming their own incompetence on the Nazis again, or they may be telling the truth, that some sort of rocket may have been fired from the center of Europe all the way to the Ural Mountains. We simply don't know.
Now, what about, let's say, Admiral C. Byrd? Does that tie in together with your research in Antarctica?
Admiral C. You mean Admiral Byrd?
Admiral Byrd, yes.
Yeah, I do mention that. There's a lot of people that buy into the mythology of, the Nazis had a secret UFO flying saucer research base in Antarctica. Admiral Byrd went down there with Operation High Jump, an expedition that was outfitted to stay for some 8 months. He went down there, and after basically a couple of weeks, a few weeks, turned tail and ran. On the way back, he lost some seaplanes. He had a full battalion of Marines with him. Why do you need a full battalion of Marines to go to Antarctica?
For a scientific expedition.
For a quote-unquote a scientific expedition, precisely. He turned tail and ran after just a few weeks down there, and on the way back, he had some press from South America and gave an interview to the El Mercurio of Santiago de Chile. And that's the newspaper. I reproduce it in Reich of the Black Sun, where he supposedly told the reporter that the United States had to prepare itself for enemy fighters that could fly from pole to pole with tremendous speed. So everybody in the Nazis had flying saucers camp says that, well, Byrd ran into this secret Nazi UFO flying saucer research factory in Antarctica and was literally chased out of there, and that's why he gave the interview. Well, let's go back to the Bell story here. The Bell story, if you look at it carefully, this is the only device for which, in my opinion, you can make a reasonably plausible case that the Nazis had some sort of incipient field propulsion capability. But the problem with the Bell was that the Germans had to build an entire electrical power plant right there at the facility where the Bell was being tested. Now, what this tells me is that the Bell device had to rely on tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of volts of electric current of direct current nature. All right. In other words, they couldn't simply supply that amount of direct current electricity using batteries and capacitors and so on. Now, what that would mean, therefore, is that if they had a base in Antarctica where they were pursuing this research, they would have had to have built an entire electrical power plant there. All right. Now, obviously, they didn't. And if you've been following the story, this project was continued, at least in some form or fashion, in Argentina, where you would have the infrastructure and capability to do this, but not Antarctica. So what I think really happened during the war with Antarctica is that the Germans probably built some sort of base there, maybe a weather station, maybe some sort of secret U-boat base and so on and so forth, but certainly not an entire research facility building flying saucers. So what may have happened is they may have had a few sophisticated aircraft based in Patagonia and southern Argentina that may have interdicted Byrd's expedition in Antarctica to keep whatever they did have in Antarctica a secret, but it was not a UFO flying saucer research base or factory or anything like that.
Very interesting. Regardless of that, though, they could have also used some type of geothermal energy, couldn't they have? I've read about Lake Vostok down in Antarctica.
Sure, if they found that. But again, you've got to remember that the German expedition to Antarctica occurred in late 1938, early 1939. So the war begins in just a few months after the return of that expedition from Antarctica. So they would have had to have transported an enormous amount of electrical equipment and then technicians and so on and so forth, and keep it supplied during the war. And this to me is simply a logistical impossibility. The German Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, was not a large navy at all. The U-boats that they had, most of them at that time when the war breaks out, weren't large enough cargo-carrying U-boats to sustain an operation, much less build something like that. So I find it very, very unlikely even on the geothermal basis.
Now, what about some of the supposed U-boats that, quote-unquote, went missing? Did they go to Argentina?
Oh boy, that's another story. That's a can of worms, and I don't even really get into that in any of my books in detail. Yes, at the end of the war, there are a number of U-boats that went missing that showed up in Argentina, months after the end of the war in Europe. And they were interred. Argentina, of course, had entered the war very, very late on the side of the Allies. That's another story in and of itself as to why Juan Perón, who was such an ardent pro-Nazi sort of guy, would actually enter the war on the side of the Allies. And briefly, it was to cite his own memoirs here. Juan Perón says something to the effect, and I cite this in the Nazi International, something to the effect that, well, we hadn't lost contact with Germany just because of the declaration of the war, because the declaration actually turned out to be of great service to the Germans, because under international law, it allowed us to go in there with our ships and airplanes and take the Germans out to Argentina. So, in other words, what Perón did was he pulled a fast one on the Allies, because by becoming a co-belligerent with them, he had the right to go into Germany with Argentinian ships and airplanes and fly out a bunch of Nazis and serve them cocktails and peanuts on their way back down to Buenos Aires, where they were going to work on all sorts of cool projects for him, like building triangular jet-powered aircraft and fusion reactors, all the stuff. So yeah, Argentina is a key player here, but Perón is another wild card in this whole deck. I forget what your original question was.
Oh, at this point, I think I've forgotten what it was. I'm just kind of. It was more about the missing U-boats, but.
Oh yeah, the missing U-boats. Yeah, you've got these U-boats showing up in Argentina. Well, people have to understand something very significant here. That when German production really gets cranking, pardon me, their war production really gets cranking under Albert Speer, circa 1943. They begin, of course, producing U-boats modularly inland and then assembling them on the coast and welding the pieces together. So their production actually begins to go up, even under Allied bombing. And many of these U-boats, the Kriegsmarine did a very, very interesting thing. It would dual number U-boats. So in other words, U-boats that the Allies thought that they had sunk, the Germans would number them with the same number of sunk U-boats. And then the other thing they did was a certain number of U-boats were siphoned off the production line and given directly, and this is so important for people to understand, given directly to Martin Bormann as Nazi Party Reichsleiter. So you actually had a secret U-boat fleet directly under the control of the Nazi Party and directly under the control of Martin Bormann. Now, why is that significant? It's because by early 1943, after the German military disaster at Stalingrad, the upper echelons of the Nazi hierarchy know that the war is lost, and they begin, Bormann in particular, to make long-term strategic plans for the survival of the German economy, for the survival of the German industrial base, and most importantly, for the survival of the Nazi Party as a cohesive entity. So these U-boats were used to transfer out of Europe, usually by way of nationalist Spain, were used to transport enormous amounts of liquid cash, capital, bullion, jewels, and German patents, which began to be, there was this huge operation that Nazi Germany waged in those final years of the war of transferring patent rights to holding companies outside of Germany and then taking the physical documentation and so on and transferring them out of the country altogether. So in other words, the capital flight plan begins circa 1943, and part of that pipeline for all this Nazi loot is quite literally the secret U-boat fleet that Bormann has control of.
That's absolutely fascinating. What about the technology in general, Joseph? Just going back over everything we've talked about today. And where did they get this technology? Did they develop it? Are the Germans just that much more intelligent, or was there so many factors that come into play that it's hard to really detail it?
Well, I don't think the Germans are any more intelligent than the British or the Russians or the Americans or anybody else fighting the war. I think what really you have to account for is that the Germans prior to the war set up, within the SS, set up a group, a secret weapons research think tank is the best way to think of it, called the Kammlerstab. And this was based inside the engineering division of the old Škoda armaments works in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. Škoda was to Austria-Hungary in World War I what Krupp is, to the Germans. So, Škoda was a very well-known, is still a very well-known armaments and engineering firm. And the Germans set up this secret research think tank inside the engineering division of the Škoda works in Pilsen. That's about 30 miles due west of Prague. And this think tank was never successfully penetrated by Allied or Soviet intelligence during the war. It had just an extraordinary belt of Gestapo security surrounding it. And incidentally, the man in charge of that security was a fellow by the name of Heinrich Miller, otherwise known as Gestapo Miller, a very close friend and associate of Martin Bormann. Guess who, once again? If you want to think of the Kammlerstab this way, think of it as kind of the Nazi German version of DARPA. Okay, the whole rationale for the existence of this thing was to brainstorm the technology trees of third, fourth, generation weapons. So, in other words, they were more or less expected to think outside the box, and I think basically it's the creation of that kind of culture of scientific and technological thinking more than anything else that really gave them the edge to come up with all of these, prototypical modern weapons. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that I think the Kammlerstab, in many ways, once General Patton's armies found it when they entered Pilsen, I think this became kind of the model for America's Black Projects world and the establishment of ARPA, later DARPA, under President Eisenhower. So I think the Kammlerstab was a direct influence conceptually in that respect. And I think, again, that, I mentioned General Patton in this respect. Patton sitting on top of the command structure of the Third Army would have been privy to all of the field intelligence reports coming in from his units as they enter all of these secret Nazi research facilities. So more than any other American commander, or for that matter, any Allied commander or Russian commander, he had a pretty good, thorough, and probably the most complete picture of the period of anyone in the Allied command structure of just what the Germans were up to. And that may have been a factor in his death.
Now, from all your research, we're coming up on the end of the segment here, Dr. Farrell, but from all your research, we've kind of touched on this a little bit. Where do you stand on the idea of extraterrestrials? Has this just been simply used as a way to deter us from our true history, or is there a little bit of truth to it?
Well, I have never, people accuse me of thinking that, Nazis and black projects explains all UFOs. I've never taken that position. In fact, I've gone out of my way to say over and over again, I'm not philosophically opposed to the idea of extraterrestrials, nor even to the idea that they might be visiting here from other planets or other dimensions or what have you. I'm not opposed to that idea at all. My problem is, as I've said over and over again, if you're of the view that UFOs represent a nuts and bolts technology, and again, I'm not opposed to that idea either, then for me, you have to have a physics signature of a device that would compel you logically to the conclusion that what you're looking at is extraterrestrial. I certainly do not see that in the case of Roswell. I certainly do not see that in the case of Kecksburg and some of these other famous cases. So philosophically, I'm not opposed, but you've got to convince me on a case-to-case basis. Now, I do think, that said, that the extraterrestrial meme has been used as kind of a deflection, and we know this for a fact in the case of the U-2 and the way that the CIA spun the U-2 as UFO sightings. They've admitted to this. You know, people would see the U-2 flying high up in the skies, moving along at a pretty good clip, and, you know, conclude that this had to be a UFO. And the CIA played along with that and stoked the fires. They've admitted this. So we do know that they have used the extraterrestrial meme as a way of cloaking black technologies that may, from time to time, inadvertently be seen.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dr. Farrell, it's all absolutely fascinating. I've researched a lot of this myself. I've read some of your books. I've been studying this for 5 or 6 years now, covering it on the Secret Teachings here and there. To me, it just gives us such a better understanding of our history, and it makes the little holes that seem to appear here and there disappear. It fills all those holes, and it makes things make a lot more sense, at least to me. I want to give you the floor just for a couple of minutes here if you'd like to promote any other work that you might be working on right now, books, whatever it might be. The floor is yours for a couple of minutes.
Well, sure. I wrote, since we're on the subject of extraterrestrials and secret technology, I've written most recently a series of books beginning with Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops. There's 2 more in that little mini-series. One is called Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. I go into the financing mechanism for all this a great deal in that book. And then another book after that called Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilizations, dealing with the idea that you're dealing with a breakaway civilization, to borrow the insight of Richard Dolan. I do have a website, GizaDeathStar.com. It does have a web store on the website where you can order my books. And I do ask if people are interested in getting my books that they use the web store to order the books from Amazon. I get a little extra in royalties that way. So, starving author syndrome there at work, folks. But they can order all my books right off my website.
Fantastic. Dr. Joseph Farrell on the program today. This is The Secret Teachings. I am your host, Ryan Gable. His website, GizaDeathStar.com. That's GizaDeathStar.com, where you can find all about him, and you can find all of his information for his books, where you can purchase them. It's also linked up at thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. Dr. Farrell, you could stay with us just one more minute.
Sure.
As I bring the music up, we'll talk to you off air. You are listening to The Secret Teachings, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Did you know that the Nazis experimented with a hyperdimensional torsion-based technology called Die Glocke, or the bell? The bell was developed at a secret base in the Czech Republic and was more classified than even the Nazis' A-bomb project. Nazi scientists experimented with the torsion-based technology as a way to tap into zero-point energy, which is believed to be the energy of the physical medium of space-time itself. The bell was also studied as a way to manipulate gravity to be used as an advanced prototypical field propulsion technology. It used the concept of rotating magnetic fields by means of the counter-rotation of plasma within the device itself. It is interesting to note that the Nazis, even officially, worked to understand free energy, field propulsion, and the ultimate doomsday weapon over 80 years ago. The Dr. Hermann Oberth, who pioneered rocket design for the Third Reich, stated that, quote, "We cannot take credit for our record achievement in certain scientific fields alone. We've been helped," end quote. When asked by whom, he replied, quote, "The people from other worlds," end quote. Many Nazis did claim to get their technology from the Vril Society, who channeled a race of beings from the Aldebaran star system. These have been Alternative Facts, brought to you by The Secret Teachings.
Are you tired of shows about bogus photographs of guinea pigs on Mars or fake photos of Bigfoot in the woods? How about fake paranormal shows that don't actually discuss the paranormal or believe that every object they see in the sky must be extraterrestrial? How about big networks that use alternative news to promote their mainstream agenda, political shows that are one-sided, or shows that claim to know exactly what is happening for ratings, even though an event just broke in the news? Me too. At The Secret Teachings, we are not like any of those other shows. We cover any topic from symbolism to ancient history and from health to the occult, including the paranormal, but we don't just jump on board with every photograph of an orb or sample of Bigfoot hair. We have no political affiliations, no religious backing, and no financial backing. We want proof, and not someone's word. If you want proof, or at least a different perspective from a host that can both accept or deny all points of view and all pieces of evidence, without holding onto a preconditioned belief or looking for evidence to support a prior conclusion, someone who can even admit when they're wrong, then check out the Secret Teachings radio show. Airtimes and free downloads are available by visiting www.thesecretteachings.info. That's thesecretteachings.info. I'm your host, Ryan Gable, and I hope that you will join us. Namaste. We are taking the power right here on The Secret Teachings. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. The website, www.thesecretteachings.info. This is Take the Power by The Cult, a suggestion by Mike D., who's also on the line with me. Mike D., how are you doing today?
Good, Ryan. Good to be back.
Absolutely. You're kind of coming back. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, if my time schedule was a little better, I would love to be on with some of the interviews, but maybe in the future, I'll be able to do some of those with you.
You're missing some good ones. You missed Dr. Joseph P. Farrell today. He's the author of Nazi International, the Giza Death Star, as well as an interesting book that I've read about the Nazi Bell Project, Die Glocke, or the Wunderwaffe, the Wonder Weapon. These subjects always fascinated me. And there's a lot of information, contrary to popular belief, what he's included in his books that show that there was this very, very high-level, scientifically understanding of nature and how to, manipulate gravity. And I mean, the Bell Project, his conclusion was that it was being used as a type of, like, miniature nuclear reactor where they were creating their own sun. What do you think about that? And all this stuff we hear about the Nazis and post-war plans, things of that sort, Mike. What is your take on that?
Well, they say there's also a theory that the bell was used for time travel. Have you heard that one?
I have heard that. And by the way, the cult is still playing in the background, so everything you say is pretty epic. But I have heard that about the time travel.
Yes, and there's a base, I believe it was in Poland, that the Nazis used. I'm not sure if it was Poland or not. Don't quote me exactly on that. But they had, I saw a program about that, and they had these giant poles with these metal kind of chains to hold up the bell, the actual bell, and they were conducting experiments there with that. And actually, there was a guy who went to that, because it was like an underground facility. Well, most of it was underground, but some of it was above ground, and the Nazis were using it. And it's really strange because I have no clue what would be used. It was like a circle with these giant poles, and
I recall that. I think it was in the Czech Republic.
Yes, probably so. But it was very strange. It was like, what could they have been doing there except holding up that bell and doing some types of experiments with it?
Yeah, and it ties in. We talked to Joseph Farrell about this. And when I say we, I just mean, relating that the show is obviously everybody's. The truth is everybody's. It's not, copywritten to me or something. So that's why I say that. But we were talking to Joseph Farrell about this and something he called Serum 525, which from his research he believed was a mercury-type substance that was injected into the device. And that this was also, I asked him, part of the, I guess you could say, scientific discovery that led to the Philadelphia experiment and rendering the Philadelphia Naval Yard in 1943, it was codenamed Project Rainbow, the USS Eldridge invisible, or essentially teleporting it maybe. I mean, there's a lot of stories about it, but that this technology is related to that project in the 1940s. So there's a huge, huge connection. On the surface, Mike, you see countries warring against each other and citizens are all patriotic, but behind the scenes, companies and governments are doing business with one another.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, we've said before, it's like professional wrestling, politics, in the ring, it's good guy, bad guy. Outside of the ring, they're at the bar afterwards drinking together. It's a game. It's a game, and it's a joke.
That's right. It is a joke. And there's a lot of things that are jokes, and sometimes people can't take a joke. We try to joke here on the show, Mike. At least I try to joke around. I know you try to joke around. You like to have a good laugh, don't you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Well,
I guess that's kind of my MO for some listeners.
Yeah, exactly.
Where's that guy that tells jokes?
They like Mike D for the jokes. There's a couple of jokes out right now. A funny one I heard was Brian Williams. That's a pretty funny joke. What did you think about that? It's been a couple of weeks. I'm aware that it's been a couple of weeks since that was released in the news, but the simple fact that it's ongoing is, I think, warranted enough to ask you, Mike.
It doesn't even really bother me because I look at all newscasters on major media programs as liars in general. So
it's to be expected.
It's to be expected. So I wasn't angry, and I wasn't sad, and I wasn't shocked, and to me it was just okay. Well, they all do it, so it doesn't bother me.
So basically,
I don't watch the program. So.
Well, basically, what you're saying is that you're still not going to watch NBC.
No, I don't watch. I don't watch those programs. So any type of news on those corporate channels, because it's all BS, and we know it. I mean, anybody with half a brain can figure it out. They're just pumping these stories one after another, and they all cover the same thing, and they all talk about the same thing, and we know who owns these stations and the mandates and what they can say. They're all robots. So
well, speaking of robots, Mike, I have to ask you then, because I want your honest opinion. What is your response to, and I covered it all last week, but to us being removed from dark matter, and I've got the emails, I've got all of the evidence, basically for censorship and refusal to back down and cease talking about child trafficking.
Yeah, well, first I've got to do two things. I've got to say thank you for that network, because it really it was a direction that I think we needed to go. And Keith has been very kind to us, in the past on most issues, and it was a good run. We got a lot of new listeners. We met some people. Some people didn't want to deal with us. Some people didn't respond back to text. But for the most part, we met some really nice people. I mean, that's Michael Vera. That's where the whole relationship came from there, because he heard us. He heard the show on Dark Matter and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you guys. You guys are kind of in the same league that I have, the same way of thinking." So, and then a lot of the interviews that we had on that network, they were great. The Ghostbuster gals and everybody that we had on, were very good interviews. Now, when it came down to actually a definition of what's paranormal and what's not, we had a disagreement. We consider child trafficking and some of the stories related to that as definitely paranormal because it dovetails into other things involving rituals and all sorts of black magic practices that we've covered on the show. And to me, there's nothing more paranormal than that. I mean, it's something that's a lot of people don't like to talk about, but obviously the news talks about it, right? So I know you feel very passionate, probably more passionate than I do about that topic. And I'm with you. I mean, if you felt like we were being censored, then we'll move on because it is your show, and I'm down with the ship. I'll sink with the ship, or I will rise with the ship, or whatever.
We've done both over the years. If it wouldn't have been for being removed from Rollins College, would have never written The Grand Illusion. If it wouldn't have been for that, we'd have never got on to Dark Matter in the first place, and we would have never met Michael Vera and got onto the L&M network. And that's how things work, and who knows what the future holds for us. And that's why I'm not mad, and I'm not upset. I'm just extremely, extremely disappointed that a joint decision can be made between someone who, in a way, is almost like a hero of ours, and Art Bell, to censor a radio show because a topic is a little bit too close to the truth. To me, that's the end of the line for anybody. That's it for me. There's no, to me, it's almost like the last vestige of hope I had in others to really speak the truth died a couple of weeks ago, and now I know that I am one of very few. Mike, you're one of very few. Michael Vera, one of very few who can stand up and tell the truth without censorship and with no filters, who may not, have the most publicly noticed voice or publicly noticed face or have the most money, but by God, by a law, by whatever deity you would like to insert, we are absolutely on the right path when even at that level we are told to still keep our mouths shut.
Yeah, I mean, what you said is true. We were asked not to talk about those topics as it didn't fall into line with the network's way of thinking, or even topics in general.
Well,
but
I want to interject.
I would have to disagree with that. Like I just said, the abuse of children, a lot of it comes down to they use these kids in rituals, and the church is involved. And what's not paranormal about that? The steeple must fall. People must fall.
I played that last week, actually. You're right, and there's so many things I could reiterate about what you've said. I agree. I think that I do feel somewhat more passionately about it because I've been dealing with it directly. There's a big difference, Mike, is what I'm saying, between being asked to come onto a network or asking to have our show put on a network and initially agreeing that we're not going to discuss something, going on the network, and then going back against that agreement and discussing it. That would be a different story, but to be placed onto a network, and I really do honestly thank Keith, because if it wouldn't have been for Keith, I wouldn't have met Michael Vera, and we wouldn't have been able to get the show to where it is now with all the additional listeners from Dark Matter. That's besides the point. The point that I'd like to get across is that regardless of that, the simple fact that our show was accepted as is, even though we've covered this topic many times in the past, asked not to cover it, and because of a couple of news articles and because of having one particular guest who we knew who he is, Kevin Annette, on the show a couple of times and discussing articles and documents, even though I can send them to the network when asked for proof, is still not good enough. There's an ulterior motive, and just like everything else that's covered up and censored, there's an ulterior motive, and part of that is not even necessarily that there's a conspiracy. It's just that the information goes so opposite, contrary to what most people believe, that their brains, their minds, their perceptions automatically reject it, Mike. They can't even fathom that it's possible.
Yeah, no. I'm in agreement with you on that. We did cover, ever since show one, we've always had a little news article on things, and which was surprising for us is we would cover a topic on, kids being abused and sex rings and sex slaves. And lo and behold, 2 weeks or a couple days later, major news corporations and stations and other mass media conglomerates would cover the story that we covered a couple days or a week prior. Remember when that was happening? We cover a story and then we'd see it on these major news topics.
It was every week.
And then we were asked for proof. Well, here's your proof.
But then the proof wasn't good enough, and we needed convictions.
It wasn't. Yeah, I mean, we weren't making these things up. We were researching these articles were coming in, and we were researching them.
Well, the fact that you mentioned that about how we were able to, I don't say predict, but just follow the patterns and release the information before the mainstream people get to it. I mean, it's evident in this article here. I sent you this article about, and I discussed it last week, pedophile priest victims urge action from Pope. And you might think that that's coming from some blog or something on the internet. It's not. It's coming from the Associated Press. That's owned by the Rothschilds. Did you get a chance to check out this article?
Yes.
Well, what did you think about it initially? Because there's a couple of sentences in there that are just so on point for me.
Well, I like the fact that a mass group of people are coming together and petitioning the Pope to actually do something and to take action. And not the number one action is to not cover these abuse cases up, number one, right? And then, they want some sorts of, what's the word I'm looking for? They want some sort of help and some sort of acknowledgement by the church that these things have gone on.
And I think it goes a step further than that, I think, because there's been an acknowledgement of it. I mean, just recently, in the past couple of months, we've had Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis. There was a point in which this happened 4 or 5 times in a month where he announces, and this was what was really crazy to me and I know to you as well, where he announces that, pedophilia is rampant in the church. 2% of Catholic clergy are pedophiles. He just out in the open says it, which according to Vatican papal law or crimen solicitanis, which basically says that every member of the church is by law required to cover up child rape and sexual abuse and the pedophilia within the church. Coming out and making a statement like that just essentially indicts everybody under that law. And it's regardless of whether or not Pope Francis says he's going to take a stand against it and he's going to set up funds or he's going to set up groups to protect children. When the abuser comes out and acts as if he's going to protect the abused, that is the fox, the proverbial fox in the hen house. That is the devil dressed like an angel, Mike.
Well, think about the amount of time, money, and everything else that they spent trying to cover those abuses up. Why couldn't they just go out and why don't they just tell the truth as their religion states that they should do? But yet they spent all this time and money and most likely murder of some of these children to cover it up, because when you already cover something up that deep, someone's going to die, right?
Yeah, but whether it's part of the ritual or part of the exposing of the ritual, you're right.
Exactly. So, and what can be more worse than a priest, someone that you're supposed to trust, a man of God of the cross, abusing someone? I mean, that poor child's head is so messed up because it's someone they look at as a father figure, as a protector, like a police officer, like the family doctor, like that great next door neighbor that you have. All that trust is built in, and these pedophiles, I think they lurk into these positions to take advantage of their actual powers and duties.
Absolutely. It's just like the TSA hiring convicted sex offenders and just known thieves and criminals. I mean, some of them, yes, fall through the cracks, just like the CPS. But there's a point, Mike, where, when you have an organization where like 20 or 30% of it is made up of the people that they claim to protect you against, it's not falling through the cracks at that point. It's called infiltration.
Agreed. I mean, I remember as a kid reading in the Middle Ages, these parishioners used to go around people and they would go around and you would confess your sins, but you would pay. You would actually pay them once you confess your sins.
Oh, that's great.
To be clean and holy again, you would have to pay them.
So if I give you $10, I can rape somebody.
Well, if you rape someone and you gave me $10, I'd forgive you.
Now, if I rape somebody, I'd be Bill Cosby. That wouldn't fly some places, but move on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, he's in the news, though, right? We'll talk about him later, or
we will talk about him later.
Or was that the segue?
That was the joke, but since it was that was the joke into a segue that will come later. But in relation to Bill Cosby, it's funny that you can make a joke on Saturday Night Live and it'd be funny, but if I make a joke, all of a sudden I am somehow worse than the people that are actually abusing children, which never made much sense to me, Mike. How many people tell me, even people that are open to this, they say, why do you feel so obligated? And Keith even asked me at Dark Matter, which, rightfully so, why do you want to cover this so badly? Why is it so important? And, I responded to that. I read the email last week, but at the same time I responded to that and explained why. I also explained that, I'm a little bit confused here because the past couple of shows that I've been told I've been covering the topic, I've only mentioned one news article out of, say, a dozen, and it's been posted on the website. And all I've done is read the first paragraph or two of the news article. It's not like I did an entire show about the topic. So why is it, Mike, that people come to us, or haters or whatever you want to call them, trolls, and they say, or even friends sometimes say, why do you want to cover this so bad? It's like they are insinuating, like, are you touching kids? Like, it's ridiculous to me that we have to defend ourselves, and like I'm worse for exposing it than the people are for actually doing it.
I mean, when we were doing past shows, I don't even think we didn't even spend a lot of time on the issue. We would bring up news articles, and it would be, incorporated into shows here and there, but we didn't talk about it every week, nor did we have a full show dedicated to it.
Right, exactly. It's not like I'm taking every single second and every minute and every hour of every show every week, every month, every year to talk about the topic. I'll make a joke occasionally to bring awareness. I'll have the evidence at the website, whatever the case might be, but we don't constantly hammer on it. But that's how it's seen.
In the beginning, we were tying in the royal family, and lo and behold, 2 months ago, we got Edward, right?
Well, exactly. That was because we were talking about Jimmy Savile. And if you read about some of the stuff that Jimmy Savile was doing, not only was the guy was a convicted pedophile, the guy was abusing people up to 40-something years old. The guy was ritually murdered, at least taking part of a ritual murder of young women after raping them. And that was so suppressed, and then it comes out that it's true, and it's like, well, okay, it's true, but he's the only one, and they distance themselves from it. And we talked about the connection between Prince Charles and Jimmy Savile. They were best buddies. And then it comes out that, boom, royal family, sex crimes, sex slavery. I mean, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. And it seems like the only people that want to talk about it, other than ourselves and a handful of others like Kevin, are like the National Enquirer.
Yeah. Who, by the way, National Enquirer, a lot of the stories that they cover are eventually come out as the truth. They were the first ones to mention Monica Lewinsky and Clinton. They were the first ones to talk about Bill Cosby and some of the victims, his abuse, his giving people Spanish fly. So it's pretty funny that a lot of people consider a rag magazine is actually the only one really digging deep into stories and finding out the truth.
And the evidence is there. The truth is there. I mean, they covered Bill Cosby recently, and not that I'm promoting it, but they've covered Bill Cosby, and they covered the sex slavery of Prince Andrew. And look how fast that was brushed under the rug. And there was the terrorist attacks in Paris, and everybody just kind of forgot about it.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, aliens on the moon, National Enquirer. You know what? That was like 20 years ago. They were right on.
Mike's thinking, bullshit, that's not true.
No, as a kid, I was fascinated by it because as a kid, like my first inclination was when I went to the library and started reading books. The first books that I read were Men in Black and The Philadelphia Experiment were the first two books as like an 11, 12-year-old that I was reading.
You must have been like just people must have thought you were nuts.
Yeah, no, my mom. I remember when that book Communion first came out too. My mom had a copy of it. With Strieber,
Whitley Strieber.
Yeah, with the gray on the front, and that was in hardback. And my mom had that.
Who also had a show before ours on Dark Matter, and apparently didn't need to show proof of anything. But that's besides the point.
Well, it's kind of strange how we were constantly asked to prove these articles, but a lot of the stories on Bigfoot left and right, no one asked them to prove any of those stories.
Yeah, that's funny because I mentioned that last week. And
I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Bigfoot, but
right, exactly.
How much Bigfoot can you take every day?
Too much Bigfoot. Just there's too much Bigfoot, and there's too much of that.
We covered
Planet X.
We covered Bigfoot years ago on the Rollins station, and that was good enough. We had an hour, 2 hours on it.
And we had Mike Lebecki back last year, and he pretty much summed up the rest of it for us.
That's right. The Yeti. And that was a great, folks listening to, you got to download that podcast that we did with Mike on the Yeti.
You're going to get, if you download, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it was an excellent, funny, enlightening, twist of the road interview.
And if you download that episode, you're going to find, I'm going to bring up the actual date of it so I can just give the date out here on air. If you download that episode, I know that the second half of that episode comes with an hour segment with, remember Michael Nuccitelli, the PhD guy?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's going to come with that segment on the end. And it's funny because in the middle of everything that happened at Dark Matter, and again, I'm aware that I talked about this last week as well, but I'm not even sure how much you know about this, Mike. In the middle of everything that happened at Dark Matter, while I aired a show one week on L&M, right here on L&M Radio Network, I had Kevin and Ed on the show, and after the show, Nuccitelli called Michael Vera after the show, late after the show, like midnight, and started screaming and cursing at him, telling him that if I ever had that, expletive, Kevin and Ed on the show again, that he was quitting. Not that he had a job, just the guy's got a PhD, supposed to be protecting children with his website and what he does. It's all just a big ruse. It's just a big scam. These people hide behind the very thing that the average person looks at and says, well, do we need to protect children? Absolutely. So they look at someone like this, or at least the mentality of somebody like this, and they get behind them. Look, well, the Pope came out and he said that there's a bunch of pedophiles, they're running rampant, and he's got to crack down on this. So what he's going to do is he's going to create groups and organizations and healing funds, and that's going to save and protect everybody, and that's just going to be what's best for all of the victims, when in fact he's one of the people that's abusing them. So, or at least had in the past and still does today. He was present at a ritual last year around this time, as a matter of fact, which is last week was the Roman festival of Feralia, which was a sacrificial holiday. It's a Roman pagan date. And the thing about that is, Mike, and I know I'm just going on a ramble way past what I was trying to get out, and the name of that episode was Mike Lebecki Investigates the Yeti and Dyatlov Pass. It was 8/23/14 was the date of that episode, 8/23/14. But when you actually begin to examine the Catholic Church, Mike, you find that the Catholic Church, where it receives its power from, that the Pope is somehow, a descendant of the ministry of Jesus. It's a completely different ministry. It's the ministry that was essentially established by Paul and not by James, Jesus' brother, who carried out his ministry after he died. So the simple fact that it's illegitimate, that the Roman Church is built upon an old Mithra sacrificial hill, I mean, it's all the same pagan religion coming through to today, but more of a negative aspect of that pagan belief system that's coming through to this day, that believe in the sacrifices of children and the sacrifices of animals. To me, Mike, I don't know. You've got kids. If God came to you in a dream and said, look, Mike, I'm the real God, and you said, wow, God's real, that Ryan kid didn't know what he was talking about. And then God says to you, okay, Mike, first thing we're going to do is you're going to kill your firstborn son. Like, how do you respond to that? Oh, fuck, okay. Let me go out here, get my kid, and drag him out to the backyard and build a bonfire. I mean, that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. It's all historical as well.
To prove loyalty, right?
To prove loyalty. What is this?
To prove
the
that
mafia?
you really love me. To prove that you really love me, I need you to kill your son or daughter.
This is the mentality of Dragnata operating thousands of years ago. It's incredible. I mean...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And people will say, because we got this before, you keep banging on Christians, what about Muslims, what about Jews? And to me, it's all the same. It's all bullshit. If it's organized, I don't care if it's Satanism. If it's organized, it's bullshit.
Organized religion equates organized crime.
Exactly. It's a ruse, and it's not something that I'm interested in. That's for sure.
Me either.
I don't need a middleman, whether it's Mohammed or whoever. I don't need a middleman to connect with God with the big G, the big G-O-D.
The big G.
I don't need to go to a house and worship to have a relationship with God. That's so ridiculous to me. But I don't know. Some people, for some reason, they need that. They need that, and I don't understand because I don't need it.
Right.
But,
so it's hard for your perspective. I mean, I used to be part of the people, not that needed it, but I was forced to go to it, and I learned from it. It wasn't necessarily completely negative. There are some people that do good out of the church setting, but anybody that supports those criminal actions and supports the abuse of children. I mean, it's so rampant that regardless of what Bergoglio says, it's so rampant that it's so rooted in our culture. It's a joke. People joke about the Vatican and pedophilia like it's nothing, and they do that because it's almost as if it's a defense mechanism, like this holy, godly authority. They could never do anything like that.
Quote unquote, a chosen people.
Oh,
you're special than everyone else.
Look, God is. He's choosing people. He's sacrificing kids. This guy is just out of control.
He's off the chain.
He
is. Off the chain. He's destroying cities. He's causing plagues. He's
the old big G. He's the OG, is what he is. The new G is a little bit different.
Exactly. The old G was a gangster.
The old G was a gangster and somewhat of a terrorist. I've explained that on the show before. But we've done half of
such a scary word, when used as a context. When in the Revolutionary War, we were the terrorists. We were the terrorists of the British. But
right.
Like we said, the great George Carlin. It's context of the word. The word means absolutely nothing. It's the context on how it's used. Like axis of evil.
It's an axis of
evil doers.
Evil doers and terrorists. And I was going to say we've spent about half of this news segment talking about, the removal from dark matter, child abuse, and a little bit about at the beginning we talked a few minutes about.
When we speak together, it's time. Is we're in a time warp.
It doesn't. It doesn't exist. It's like a Twilight Zone episode.
The continuum, the time-space continuum. It goes so fast when we speak to each other.
Right. Well, what do you get when you combine the convictions of radio host and Ryan Gable and Mike D? You get the secret teachings. I actually have a Twilight promotion that I play. If you've never heard it, Mike, play it once in a while. But anyway, I was going to say that we talked a little bit about what we discussed in the first 2 hours with Dr. Joseph P. Farrell about the Wunderwaffe, the Nazi wonder weapon, and what that could have possibly been used for. Here we go. In the news, I mentioned the article about the victims of pedophile priests, and part of that letter that they had sent, Mike, not that you need any type of recognition from the Pope. You know, you don't need recognition from the criminals. You're asking the criminals to admit that they're guilty and then to protect you. It just sets it up for something much worse. But in the letter that they wrote, it says that only civilian trials and church reform will put an end to the, and I'm quoting this from the letter, Mike, the great holocaust of thousands of boys and girls who were sacrificed to avoid scandal and salvage the image and prestige of the Catholic Church's representatives in the world. Now, just because I told you that weeks and weeks and weeks and months and years ago, and others have told you that years and years and years and years and decades ago, and because we see it now, just because that hurts some people's feelings that they were wrong does not mean that I need to censor myself. This is the honest to insert whatever deity truth that you can get. And this is a topic that, since it scares so many people and since it just kind of just rubs everybody the wrong way, we know that we're onto something really, really big, Mike. And I'm really happy to be a part of being able to expose this, be it on the Secret Teachings or any other show that would have me on that program, or to, you know, the Last Frequency that I co-host with Michael Vera. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I'll also be co-hosting a show with Kevin Annett on the BBS radio network that'll be airing Sunday afternoons at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So I'll also be co-hosting that. So we're making a lot of progress.
Yeah, no, man. I mean, you're a man with convictions, you know, and I'm good with it.
Isn't that ironic?
I kind of helped us get on that network, but it was a path of faith, fate. It was a path of fate, and you know where the road leads, it's usually a better place. And like I said, you know, we had a good time with that network. We want to talk about some things that we were censored, and so we move on. So no big deal.
That's
you know?
exactly right.
And by the way, we did such a great job on that network, and we had such interesting shows and topics that, you know, if by some reason, which it's not going to happen, that we stop talking about this stuff, we're always invited back. And I appreciated Keith's words there and Art's words that you know, they enjoyed the show. We had a well produced show. We had a lot of great guests. We had a lot of listeners. We also had a lot of haters, but that's what happens.
Good. That's controversy.
That's what happens when you have a lot of listeners.
And I'd like to make that very clear. Go ahead and finish what you're saying, and I'm going to actually, before we get to the rest of the news, I want to read the paragraph that I was sent.
So in extending that offer, I thought it was very kind, and it was very thoughtful, and it just goes to show you that, you know, we did have a good relationship, but we had a difference of opinions on things that should be covered and talked about, and so we move on.
Absolutely. And, you know, who knows what this is going to lead to. I've mentioned that I've got a couple of books in the work that have really just come to the forefront after, you know, knowing that we've been removed from dark matter. It seems like every time I get kicked off a radio show, I'm going to write a book. So we'll see how many times we get kicked off and how many books end up being written by the time that they kill me. Here's the email, and again, you know, I had no malice, no negativity towards Keith, but I wanted to read the email because I didn't get to read the entire thing last week. But you're exactly right, Mike. The hand was extended for us to essentially come back if we don't cover that topic anymore. But you know, if it came out tomorrow that it was all a lie, and I had proof that it was all a lie, which it's not, you know, then that would be a different story. But in this case, the email says, Art and I had a discussion about this, and so I've decided we drop your show for now. I will miss the good topics you cover, but don't want to have to edit the show each week. Well, I don't either. That's why we're not there anymore. You certainly had your fans and haters. It brought controversy to the air. Should the situation change or you want to produce a program that is more appropriate for our networks, we can revisit this. I'm sorry to have to break ties. I really do. I want to offer time to as many shows as possible. You produced a technically competent show. It always sounded good. Let's keep in touch and keep me appraised on any changes in your program content. So there you go. It's not necessarily the end of the world, as some people might have perceived that it is. It's just very disappointing that anything would be censored, but at the same time, there's still a hand extended if we decide to do another show on a different topic.
There you go.
So there we go.
Enough said.
And here we go, Mike. I've got something for you. You ready for this? You love Mars, don't you?
I love Mars, but I love Venus. I love Venus even more because it's a planet that for some reason doesn't make the news. Doesn't make the news, Mars, but it's supposedly coined Earth's sister planet, but yet no one talks about it.
Well, they suppress the female just like they do here on Earth. They promote the god of war, Yahweh, and all the rest on Mars, but they suppress the female, which is why the Templars were prosecuted by the church, which is why we're persecuted by the same kind of ideas. But here it is, Mike. If you've seen this article, cloud over Mars leaves scientists baffled. What do you think about this cloud over Mars? I've seen the picture of it. It says amateur astronomers have spotted two strange cloud-like plumes high over Mars, deepening the mystery of what constitutes the red planet's atmosphere, a study said on Monday.
Red planet's atmosphere. I don't know why they keep calling it red. I mean, do they call the southwest region of the U.S. Red?
That's
I mean,
right.
sure, there's red hues to it, right? But it's more of like an orange-brown tinge to the soil there in the southwest. And why they keep saying that when Mars has a light blue atmosphere to it, too, from the real pictures. It's just so annoying to me, man. And then why they're putting these articles out every week of different things, I don't know if it's some kind of game plan to desensitize or to make fun of by calling things jelly donuts, or there's a statue of a woman holding a water vase, or Bigfoot spotted on Mars. It's just, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't know if it's disinformation or they're trying to leak some well, that's disinformation, trying to, false news, but putting some truth into the false reports. I mean, maybe that's the deal. But we know Mars had an atmosphere, had oceans. It was ripped apart by some type of weapon, nuclear weapon, and the atmosphere was stripped. I mean, why would we call it the red planet, or associate Mars with war, and because that's what happened to it. I mean, well, right? I mean, if you think about it, why would we, all the connotations that we give to Mars? There's a reason for it, right? And they come from very ancient times. The god of war, the red planet, the blood planet. I mean, come on.
And emperors, kings, queens, they would use the alignment of Mars to determine when they should go into battle. So I think you might be onto something there, in a very much more than just ancient. We're talking about maybe millions of years in the past, but I think you might be onto something there, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, from the books and everything that I read, there was something that happened. There were people on that planet, and there was a battle between certain species of aliens and humans, and that ripped that planet apart.
Did you get a chance?
Not apart, but the atmosphere apart.
Have you read all three of M. Don Shorn's books?
Read the first one.
You read the first one.
He gets into it with, I mean, it's what's the Terror Papers, right? And then it's also from, remember, did Dark Matter pull out the Lacerda interview that we talked about?
No, that one wasn't played because we talked. Also, I mentioned something about a TSA officer being indicted on pedophile charges, or child pornography charges, rather. So, no, the show never aired. It was cut mid-air.
Oh, man, because we talked about that, the interview with Lacerda, who was a female reptile, and she also discussed that also, about the wars that went on.
Let me tell you something. That episode, I'm going to be in the process of, moving around and doing some other things outside of radio soon that are going to be dealing with the radio. They just won't be directly on air. So this episode, last week's episode, the show with Betty Martini 2 weeks ago, and the Lacerda show are all going to be somewhat mixed together in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So you'll probably hear the Lacerda show one more time before the end of March here on the L&M Radio Network. And then, of course, after that, I've got other guests lined up. We've got Jim Oglesby. We've got Robert Sullivan again about movie symbolism. And then we'll also be talking with some other people who we have lined up for guests. But that show will air again for sure. That Lacerda show was great. You did a great job of explaining the details of that story. I still find it pretty incredible. And it aligns with at least a form of history, a version of history that makes much more sense than what we've already been told, Mike.
Yes, for sure. That was a great, we covered that. It was very interesting, So I don't want to spoil it, but we can end it there on that. But I think people should listen to that, and hopefully we give a heads up when we air that again.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll always be available. Information will be available at thesecretteachings.info. It's always three W's, www.thesecretteachings.info. You'll also find information and a link. If you're at latenightinthemidlands.com, click the Secret Teachings link, take you to our website, rather, and you'll also find it at facebook.com/The Secret Teachings. There's also a link to the Facebook from thesecretteachings.info. And don't forget, on the website, you'll also find a link to download all of our past shows. I think the Lacerda show is available for download anyway, so you could go check it out that way. It's free to stream and it's free to download, contrary to the trolls saying that you have to pay for it. You don't actually have to pay for it, which is funny, Mike. I got messages all over the website, people saying, oh, you charge for everything and you keep your information hidden. This is ridiculous. I was like, well, the email's at the top of the page, and all the shows are free, so obviously you have no clue what the hell you're talking about. You're just trying to cause trouble.
No, that's very strange, because the only thing that you would have to pay for, and by rightly so, would be the book. That would be your book. And if the only thing else on there is if you feel if you can give a donation to keep the show running, that's fine also. That's the only thing we ask. That's the only thing for sale. Everything else is free. Even the old, there's a lot of shows that charge for old shows, old podcasts.
Host. Excuse me.
Everything that we have on the website is free. The old shows. I mean, that's why people really dig us. Is because we kept it free for years now.
They dig us.
They dig us.
That's the terms the kids are using now, Mike.
No, I don't know, but I'm using it.
Mike's using it. Okay. Well, we're being dug, I guess is the way to look at it. Like there's underground cities. I have another article here. It says Obama advisor John Podesta, his biggest regret, keeping America in the dark about UFOs. What's your thoughts on this article? You said you had a chance to look at it.
Yeah, no, I love it. Just like, you get these ex-presidents leaving office, not anyone lately, but I'm talking like Eisenhower, that give messages to the American people. Woodrow Wilson, sorry about the banking mess. I mean, they're all, it just gets me angry when you come out and there's things that you could have done, but now you come out in the media and you say, I wish my biggest regret is not exposing, the UFO. Why don't you take a chance, and expose it while you were there. Get some documents out. Leak some documents, or come forth with some documents. Quit your job. Quit the job and take those documents and let the American people see what's really going on. To me, it's I don't respect it.
It adds fuel to the fire, is what it does, I think, and promotes a lot of false myths.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to look at it as a negative light, but I mean, I think he could have done something when he was there. A lot of these guys, like the Phoenix mayor, when the lights, when the guy Mockett came out dressed like an alien.
Someone should have punched him in the
face. Yeah, and then comes out, after he gets out of office and apologizes, he made a mistake. He doesn't know, he thinks those lights were actually UFOs. I mean, they're just jerks,
Absolutely, Mike. I do completely agree with you there. That's. I don't know if I could explain it any better.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disservice to the American people when you do that, and you look like a complete fool.
You're making a mockery of the truth.
Yeah, and you were played for a fool, and the people that your bosses read you they read perfectly. They read you perfectly as a guy who would not do anything, would not take action, and would not expose things. So your bosses read you perfectly.
That's right. That's why you got hired, probably. And it's. To me, when I see something like that, it irritates me as well, and it doesn't, give those people any type of credibility within these communities when they come out and they do something like that, and then they come out and apologize and say, "Well, I really believe in it. We were just, messing around or joking around." That's not the proper way to release information. To release, I call it truth, but truth can be subjective depending on how you define it. But to release information about the truth about a particular situation, such as UFOs or aliens. And, when you see somebody like this come out and they talk about it, all the UFO people and the paranormal people, it's like Christmas morning. They rip it open and they don't appreciate it, and then they throw it to the side and they use it as, later they use it. And when they use it later, outside of the Christmas analogy, they use it as a type of like justification to say, well, everything we've been talking about is real because this ex-government official came out and they said that they regretted it while they were in office, and then they got out of office and they admitted that it was all true. A lot of this is just disinformation to continue to feed the false myths that have been promoted, I think.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, listen, I don't really trust the guy, coming out after the fact and saying his biggest regret was not bringing this information out to the American people. I mean, who cares? He didn't do anything, so go away.
That's right. I'll tell you what, Mike, all these articles are available at thesecretteachings.info. We're running out of time. I've got that article, I've got The Cloud Over Mars, the pedophile priest victim's letter, as well as this article, Will First Contact with Aliens Spell the End of Civilization? Experts discuss dangers of sending messages to ET. Well, if there's experts, you've got to know that they are absolutely on point. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. That article is up at thesecretteachings.info under the top news tab. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. I have two last articles, Mike D. The first one, and I think you'll really appreciate it, and I hope that you're not eating an apple right now. Obama administration approves world's first browning-resistant apple as biotech food wars heat up again. Green groups and organic-only food advocates had pushed hard for the techno fruit to be rejected. Two varieties of the Arctic apple are identical to ordinary fruit with the exception of a single gene splice that stops oxidation when it's cut open. What do you think about the genetically modified apple?
Yeah, I mean, I thought they had that a while back, but I wouldn't eat it.
Those are words of wisdom. Don't eat it.
Now you need. Yeah, exactly. It's simple. Don't eat it. And genetically modified anything, I don't care if it's mosquitoes, when you're playing with Mother Nature, it means we're headed down a dark path, I think.
You know what? Speaking of those mosquitoes, there was a news story in the news recently down here in Florida where the mosquitoes, it's a British company that engineered them. They're going to be released here in Florida, Mike, genetically engineered mosquitoes. And then, I've been told that I'm wrong for suggesting that they were going to engineer mosquitoes and then in some cases inject them with vaccinations that then they would sting us and then we'd be vaccinated. I was crazy for suggesting that, but now it's true.
Yeah, now it's true. I think they're releasing those. Is it where are they actually releasing those? At the Everglades? I'm not really sure.
It's going to be central to southern Florida, so and that's just officially. Great. Imagine... so where you're living, you're probably going to see a couple.
Get bit by a GMO mosquito.
A genetically modified mosquito. No, thank you. Here's the next article I have. You're one who really just kind of brought a lot of information to the table about Bill Cosby. The last article here, or the second to last article rather, I felt like a real-life blow-up doll. 2 more sexual assault accusations brought against Bill Cosby, including one in Canada where there is no statute of limitations. Other than this, the 2 women accused Bill Cosby of drugging them decades ago when they met him as young models, and one said he sexually assaulted her as more of his performances were canceled. Regardless of whether or not these people tell the truth, I think that it should just be pretty much well established that this is how Hollywood and the entertainment industry work, whether it's consensual or not consensual sex, in terms of drugs, and in terms of essentially rape, whether it's in pornography or if it's just in regular, movies and actors and actresses and directors and stuff like that. This stuff is just rampant, just as much as pedophilia is rampant within the Vatican, Mike.
Well, they don't call it Hollyweird for nothing.
They call it Hollyweird. Hollywood, the wood of the Druidic magicians. And they used it to cast illusion, if you will, an illusion of reality.
The Bill Cosby thing kind of is in the same kind of realm as the church pedophiles. Here's a man that's trusted, America's dad, right? Cosby family.
That father figure.
Father figure. When the man is actually a psychopath, a serial rapist, a sociopath, a scumbag, right? Now, how you can find pleasure into having sex with someone who is unconscious, it's very strange to me. It's not something that appeals to me, it's just really weird. It's really weird, man. He's a strange dude, man. I like to slap him upside the head and make that pudding pop come out of his mouth.
Don't you have an impression?
F that guy.
Where's the famous Mike D impression or the Bill Cosby?
Man, you know what? I'm so angry right now. I don't even want to do it.
Can't even do the impression.
I don't want to do it. That guy, And why are all these women coming forward now? Because the man at that time in the 60s and 70s was very powerful in Hollywood, and some of these women were trying to just get a career started, and to come forward and say you were raped by Bill Cosby, no one was going to believe you in the first place.
Right, and a lot of people come forward and they say something like that. There is a handful of them that want money, and they usually go away in due time. But the people that say, no, we don't want money, we want this person to be brought to justice.
And there's lots of people in that Bill Cosby victims that all they want is just to say that this happened to me. They're not suing him for any money, and there's a couple of women that are doing that. And when you have those numbers, to me, the guy's guilty, plain and simple. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get it.
Right, and the guilt lies within a matter of association within the networks of people who do this, and within the eyewitnesses and the people who claim to have been abused. It doesn't. It's just crazy that people think that it has to go through some type of official court of law with a U.S. government stamp on it, when in fact U.S. citizens have the right and have a duty to establish common law courts in order to try criminals like this and to remove them from society. It's just crazy to me how we have been so conditioned and brainwashed to believe that the legal system, as we call it, the system of law that we have established, is God, that institutions like the Vatican are above the law, or that government officials are above the law, and that's just simply not the case, Mike.
Yeah, Bill Cosby should, the stupid sweaters that he wears, they should give him a sweater just a serial rapist on it and let him walk around with that. Stupid-ass sweaters.
Well...
Fuck that guy. Let's move on. What do you got?
Did it feel good to say that? Because those are not family-friendly words, Mike.
I'm sorry. It's a word that I use in context to show my anger towards someone.
Right, there's no such thing as a bad word. I was just letting you ramble there. It's my fault. I was letting you ramble. I was looking for a quotation from somebody here. I can't seem to find it. Maybe it's a little bit here in the front. Oh, here it is. I read this last week on the show, but in terms of eyewitness testimony, listen to this, Mike. This comes from Chief American Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials in 1946, a man by the name of Robert Jackson. He says this: "The proof of crimes against humanity generally lies not in documents, but in the witness of survivors, in mass graves, and in the implied proof of the intent to commit these crimes contained in the everyday and institutionalized laws, attitudes, and norms of the murderous regime." Now, he's talking about, of course, governments and religious institutions and things like that, specifically governments, because talking about the Nazis. But the proof of crimes of humanity generally lies not in documents, but in the witness of survivors, which in this case with Bill Cosby is what we have. Now, if the man's innocent, the man's innocent, but all evidence seems to point to the contrary. And a lot of people defend him simply because, well, we like this show for so many seasons. We might as well back him up for this, too.
Yeah, I get there's people in this dream world that they don't want to, their idol, did something heinous, but yet they don't want to believe it, because for some reason that's too much for them to take. I don't have any idols per se. So, whoever did something Even if it was one of my favorite singers, that was proven guilty. Would I support that individual? Well, depending on what he or she did, maybe not, but I'm not going to sit here and get upset about it and deny, or at least deny it, especially if the facts are all proving that the person's guilty. I don't care who it is. If the facts are proving that you're guilty beyond a doubt, I don't care, if you're my father, I'm not going to take that Bill Cosby stance. There's people that, are so, they're just standing by him because they believe he's a good guy for so long. That's all they've known is Bill Cosby, the stand-up guy, is America's dad, blah, 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 blah. He teaches black people, that they shouldn't wear their pants down through their butts. I remember he was on off for a while about that. Like, you young black people need to pull up your pants.
I remember that. Anyway, you're right. I think that when it comes to stories like this, you got to be careful initially to not jump too far into it, because a lot of the times there are certain celebrities, there are certain people who they speak out against the system that they're involved in, and so they're kind of set up. But more often than not, that's not the case, and the case actually revolves around this person being guilty, and I think that he probably is guilty of this. We could talk about that all day. I have one last article, and then we'll be finished with today's show. Mike, I appreciate you joining me on the show, and all of these articles can be found at thesecretteachings.info. The last article that we found pretty much right before we came on to air, chilling, and this was actually from 2 weeks ago, February 17th, I just found it. Chilling playthings of Slenderman stab. Remember we covered Slenderman on the show?
Yeah.
And the stabbings and how we related that to the Faceless Man and groups such as Anonymous and the political agenda to eradicate those who are anti-establishment, essentially. People that can't be named and labeled are obviously crazy and terrorists and nut jobs and murderers. It says, chilling playthings of Slenderman Stabber, the 12-year-old who nearly murdered classmate, mutilated Barbies with cult-like symbols, drew cartoons about murder, and made lists of attack supplies. Now, I looked at the Barbie, and the Barbie doll has like a circle with an X in it. The X is extremely occult. It represents male and female energy. Inside the circle is a symbol of eternity. It obviously has different meanings to different people in different groups. These stories just seem a little bit like, it just seems like something's missing. It seems out of context, I think. I don't know. I know you didn't even get a chance to see these photos, but I just wanted to put this up at thesecretteachings.info because, once again, we were on top of this story immediately, and we pretty much called every single detail of it. And in relation to this, we call it Slenderman stabbing, you see how they make it look and sound much more diabolic than it is. They say cult-like symbols. What the hell is a cult-like symbol? It's just like that news story we read about food, how one of the people promoting big business, and they were promoting fast food, said, Mike, you're busy, right? You don't want to go to, what did they say? You don't want to go to a farmer's market and buy a zucchini and just ponder over esoteric food labels. I've never bought a vegetable that had a label on it. It's because it's just a vegetable. But, that's the kind of image they give to it. Anyway, any last words? Any comments on that? Anything else you'd like to relate to the listeners here at The Secret Teachings?
You got to dig into that kid's background and see if he has killed any animals, because it sounds like he's on a road to being a serial killer of some sort.
It was actually a girl. It was Morgan Geyser.
Oh,
it was a girl.
Hey, girls can be serial killers too.
Absolutely.
And where do you get those symbols out? He's probably watching that Disney show.
Oh, you mean Gravity Falls?
Yeah, that's where he's getting the symbols from.
Well, see here now.
Or her. She's getting the symbols.
Now we're going to get the email. They should apologize to Disney for suggesting that they had anything to do with this heinous attack.
Well, I can tell you what, whoever's putting that cartoon together for kids has a lot of information, that they're sharing as a cartoon. But we know those symbols, and we know what they mean. So to me, it's pretty that could be another whole show. We could just talk about that cartoon and many other cartoons.
Many other cartoons, yes.
Disney orientated. That's weirdo Disney, you know, and those all the little tricks that they do with these movies that they produce, and these, you know, these images that they sink in your subconsciousness, and all the sexual imagery of these Disney movies. It's crazy. And people say, "Oh, it's just the animators having fun." You know, that's why they put that schlong in, the Little Mermaid. You know, it's just a joke. Oh, so they're doing this joke has continued for decades, I guess, right?
It's a continuing joke, yes.
Yeah.
That's
can I say the F word now?
I don't care. There's no such thing as a
It's
bad
amazing. It's amazing that people go to these parks. They raise the prices every year. Every year they raise the prices to Disney and Universal Studios. How can people even afford it? It's going to be a time where only the rich can afford to go to these. It's coming.
We love the mouse. We love the mouse. Hail Disney.
Hail Disney. These ticket prices are never going to get lower. They're continuing to rise, just like some of these sporting events, and where you can't even get a decent seat. You got to sit up at the rafters because they play these athletes so much, and these owners want to make so much money that every year they raise ticket prices, and it's just like the average person, even the higher middle class person, has to really budget super tight if they want to take their kids to these games. It's effing ridiculous, man.
It is ridiculous. Hockey for me is a little bit cheaper. I've been able to get some great seats for hockey for like $20.
Yeah, I mean, hockey players don't make as much money. Well, only the superstars.
Superstar in hockey makes like what the bench warmer in basketball makes. They make a fraction of that.
Yeah.
You've got Kobe making like $136 million, and you've got like Alexander Ovechkin and Steven Stamkos barely making $35 million. You know, over the same contract length. It's a fraction of what other athletes make. Because hockey, I don't think, is not as big here in the United States, and this is all about big business. Mike, I appreciate you joining me on the show. We've gone for a little bit over an hour. I know we went a little over time. All those articles are available at thesecretteachings.info. That's www.thesecretteachings.info. Give me a song to go out on here today as we say our goodbyes.
Oh man, let's go old school again. What we used to do. Let's do Clutch. Can you do Burning Beard by Clutch?
Let me see. I've got the Cult. Let me find the C's. Clutch. LL.
Or any Clutch song, whatever you choose. Pick one.
They're
all good.
I've got it right here. How about Prophets of Doom?
Yes, that sounds good.
Prophets of Doom.
Yeah. My last word to people out there is research Venus. Study Venus. F Mars.
And the Venus families, it's so suppressed. The god of war, Yahweh, promoted male energy, promoted female energy, the Venus suppressed. We're just kind of like the Knights Templar, Mike. We're being prosecuted by those powers that be for exposing what lies under the exposition of the secret teachings. I'm Ryan Gable, the website www.thesecretteachings.info, and we'll continue to expose those secret teachings right here on The Secret Teachings. Until next week, I'm Ryan Gable. Mike D. will be back.
I So